Chapter 97. I've been busy lately, so the update time is a bit messy. Please forgive me. No matter what, it had to be guaranteed that he would be able to eat twice a day. After this week, the rhythm would adjust. This chapter is the second update on the 17th. The vast majority of the Construction Society's executive committee members had stayed at Acumen College for over 10 years. 6 years ago, Yen Hong's academic scandal had shaken the entire world. There was no reason for them to forget it. What's more, wasn't the theme they were currently revolving around gear? In that academic scandal, the accident in Gear's underground laboratory was the scene that caused the world to be in an uproar. Yen Hong, facing the criticism of the entire world, deliberately created an accident-destroyed evidence, and used the crudest method to cover up his crimes. This also caused Acumen College, who was responsible for the administration, to lose face. After the incident, Yen Hong, who was condemned by everyone, disappeared without a trace. Yen Yonghua, who was a lecturer in the academy, also disappeared. Most people felt that they would never see them again. But reality slapped him hard in the face. It really is Yen Yonghua. He used to give me lessons. Lu Tao recognized Yen Yonghua and couldn't help but poke his companion beside him. Hey, he's the person in charge of the Rainbow Fund? That's a credit limit of tens of billions. And it seems that Quantum Corporation is behind it. Is Yen Hong coming back for revenge? His companion shook his head. He did not and could not answer this question. Yen Yonghua's demonic crimson eyes swept across the faces of Lang Ding and the others. He nodded slightly as a greeting. Then, he turned his gaze to Luo Shuqing, who was glaring at him, and bowed. Ms. Luo, I'm sorry. My words were inappropriate. Actually, I have always admired and respected Senior Sister Qingwen. Therefore, when I returned this time, the first thing I did was to purchase gear. This was Senior Qingwen's undying work back then. Back then, I also hoped to restore the glory of my father's laboratory. Luo Shuqing didn't hide her emotions at all. In your dreams. Yen Yonghua calmly tapped his temple. Now, I have the ability to turn dreams into reality. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that you haven't eaten yet. I won't disturb you for now. We'll talk about the transfer later. He walked straight out of the cubicle, and Lawyer Zhu hurriedly got up to follow. Luonan stared coldly at this strange man outside the compartment. He didn't know who Yen Yonghua was at first, but now he was clear. It was this person, Yen Hong's son. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe him as a mortal enemy. No matter which side it was, they had no intention of resolving the enmity. Yen Yonghua walked to Luonan's side. Just as he was about to brush shoulders with Luonan, Yen Yonghua suddenly turned his head. He used a twisted smile to meet Luonan's clear and cold eyes. Speaking of which, my father and Mr. Luo Yuandao have worked together for many years. I was also Mr. Luo Yuandao's student and research assistant for a period of time. Senior Zhongheng, Senior Qingwen, and I are fellow alumni of Acumen College. If there is a chance to coexist, I hope to continue the fate of our two families at Gear. Luonan was disinclined to respond to such meaningless words. But in the next moment, Yen Yonghua suddenly turned around without any warning. He raised his hand and embraced Luonan's shoulder. It looked intimate, but Yen Yonghua bent his waist slightly. His unyielding strength forced Luonan to bend over. His mouth was right next to Luonan's ear as he laughed in a low voice. I was exaggerating a bit just now. You weren't that small when you were wrapped up in the womb. At worst, you were like a chihuahua rolling around in the solution. You were actually quite cute. Yen Yonghua felt Luonan's body go rigid in an instant. He patted Luonan's shoulder. It's just a pity for Senior Qingwen. I've been fantasizing about her since junior high. But from then on, I never did it again. Do you know why? Luonan turned his face slightly. His gaze was penetratingly cold and hard, but it was unable to affect Yen Yonghua's twisted, smiling face in the slightest. It's too easy for me to make associations. When her face flashes in my mind, I think of that pile of rotting flesh and bones. In this instant, a certain string in Luonan's mind snapped. The heavily chained crow was about to pierce out of his body amidst the rattling vibrations, piercing through the head of the man before him. But a scorching firepower was transmitted from Yen Yongbo's body in advance. It penetrated through Luonan's neck, just like a red-hot blade. The instant brush with death caused Luonan's thoughts to stagnate. The heavily chained crow didn't come out, but Yen Yongbo's words pressed into his eardrums one word at a time. Look. This is the archetype format. This is the burner. This is the true result. And your kind is worthless. I didn't have the time to say those words to your dead old man back then. I'll give them to you. Yen Yongbo let go of Luonan's shoulder and laughed loudly just like that. He directly left, and the dark-faced bodyguard followed closely behind. Lawyer Zhu also hurriedly followed. Lang Ding and the other members of the construction society looked at each other in dismay. They hesitated for a while, but they still chased after Yen Yongbo. Yen Yongbo seemed to have gone mad. He laughed all the time. His laughter was hoarse and sharp, echoing throughout the entire dining hall. Nan Nan. Luo Shuqing, who had just been intimidated by the inexplicable power, finally broke free. She flipped over the chair and threw herself over. She hugged Luonan, who was still in a bent posture, and spoke incoherently. Are you okay? What did he say? That bastard. Are you okay? What did he say? Luonan didn't say anything. Up ahead, Yen Yongbo walked very quickly, pulling open the distance between him and the group of people from the construction society. Finally, his laughter stopped, and his face quickly returned to its usual cold and solemn state. Lawyer Zhu. Lawyer Zhu had to jog the entire way in order to keep up. It was inevitable that his elite style of calmness was a bit scattered. But he had no choice but to run. He had been scared stiff by Yen Yongbo's previous performance. He had never thought that this big financial backer of his, who had always maintained a calm appearance, would actually have such a crazed core. He gasped for breath and asked, Mr. Yen, do you have any instructions? How is the school? The sudden change in topic and situation caused Lawyer Zhu to stare blankly. Luckily, this was his field of expertise, so he quickly replied. They basically agree to speed up the process. If the bidding goes smoothly, why doesn't it go smoothly? Under the unreserved support of the Rainbow Fund. Come, Lawyer Zhu. Tell me where it doesn't go smoothly? Lawyer Zhu felt his legs go a bit soft. He unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva and rushed to remedy the situation. After the bidding succeeds, the relevant procedures will be completed within half a month. Are there any other obstructions? Right now he's mainly in the society. That one just now. I'm talking about Luonan. Lawyer Zhu glanced at Yen Yongbo's face from the corner of his eyes as he spoke. Seeing that Yen Yongbo didn't have any special reaction, Lawyer Zhu continued to speak. Luonan is a member of the society. He doesn't have the right to make decisions, but he does have the right to request for reconsideration. In other words, he can go through questioning a certain part of the procedure to drag things out for a period of time. Of course, this doesn't affect the overall situation. We can advance forward together. Yen Yongbo suddenly turned around and grabbed his collar in a rude manner. He stared at him and said, Lawyer Zhu, do you know what the big picture is? Lawyer Zhu was scared silly and shook his head vigorously. Do you know how many earthquakes have occurred in Xia City over the past 10 days? He continued to shake his head. It's been 15 times. If you don't even know this, how can you talk about the big picture? Lawyer Zhu had already been thoroughly confused by Yen Yongbo's logic. Fortunately, Yen Yongbo released his grip and sighed. Sorry, I'm a little excited. Help me think, what should I do now? Right now my mind is filled with kill, kill, kill. Isn't this not too good? Chapter 98. I came back too late today. The second chapter will be finished in the wee hours of the morning. I might as well put it on tomorrow morning. Everyone doesn't have to stay up to wait. It's equivalent to tomorrow's third chapter. Also, there was an error in the chapter numbering. It has been corrected. Because of their pause, Lang Ding and the others also caught up. Yen Yongbwa didn't pay them any attention, only using a very serious expression to stare at Lawyer Zhu, hoping to get an answer. Lawyer Zhu's legs were really weak. His heart was already bursting with regret and fear. Now, he was more certain than ever that Yen Yongbwa wasn't a normal person from the very core. Yen Yongbwa wasn't normal, but Lawyer Zhu believed himself to be very normal. How could he possibly speak of this kind of kill matter in front of others? He just wanted to block Yen Yongbwa's mouth and stop him from spitting out those murderous words. For this, he desperately squeezed his brain tissue and tried hard to form words. Mr. Yen, perhaps we can use another method. If we want to circumvent his right to review, the best way is to terminate his membership in the club. Yes, I know this is impossible, but there is an alternative. Yes, there is another way. Under pressure, people's potential was indeed limitless. Lawyer Zhu's brain really did jump out with a brand new train of thought. Yes, we can make him withdraw. We just need to prove that Luo Nan has some kind of direct interest relationship with this auction. Then we just need to hold a hearing, and I can shut him up forever. At this time, Lang Ding and the others had already formed a circle, blocking most of the corridor. He wanted to greet him, but Yen Yongbwa didn't even bother to look him in the eye. Instead, he was quite interested in Lawyer Zhu's words. Benefits? For example, we can question whether or not Luo Nan had a secret agreement with the Mystic Arts Research Society beforehand. After all, the timing of his entry into the society is too coincidental. We can completely make an issue out of this. Yen Yongbwa nodded slightly. Very good, but how do we prove it? No, Mr. Yen, I'm just making an analogy. Lawyer Zhu finally regained his confidence in his professional field. His voice became a bit louder. We can completely adopt a more proactive method. In fact, I think that the transfer intention that you mentioned just now is a very good entry point. I don't really understand the situation inside. It seems to be related to some patents? Yen Yongbwa's expression did not change. He nodded slightly. More or less. Luo Nan is the direct descendant of the victim? The legal heir? That's right, that's his grandfather. Then, if you don't mind, you can use your private identity to fight a lawsuit with them. As long as the court accepts it, a beneficial relationship will appear between you and Luo Nan. And as the person in charge of the Rainbow Fund, you are a key figure in this bidding. Then, all of Luo Nan's questioning of Gear's bidding process can be viewed as selfish actions. I think that with this reason, the school will make a very sensible decision. No matter how much he objects, it will be useless. Hearing this, Yen Yongbwa stroked his chin lightly. Is that so? Filled with anger, yet powerless to do anything. This is good. Does this count as a pass? Lawyer Zhu secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Lang Ding and the others finally got the chance to say hello. They were actually very embarrassed. He inexplicably listened to a string of schemes aimed at Luo Nan, but the other side really didn't try to avoid it at all. After all, this was a public place. Many people in the restaurant were looking over because of the previous incident. There were also people going in and out of the private rooms along the corridor, casting curious glances at them. Not too far away there was a big guy who was nearly 2 meters tall. His face was flushed from being drunk. He leaned against the wall and looked over in a daze. He probably guessed that with his size, he would bump into him if he walked over? But Yen Yongbwa really didn't care. He was very calm right now. I'm very sorry for what happened just now. It involved some personal grudges. I lost my composure a bit and made everyone laugh. Right now, not even a hint of craziness could be seen from Yen Yongbwa's body. But the more he was like this, the more people felt that he was strange and unfathomable. In the end, it was Lang Ding who suggested, "Let's go inside and talk. We need to drink a few cups in a bit to welcome Teacher Yen." No matter what they thought in their hearts, everyone nodded in agreement. The group of people immediately surrounded Yen Yongbua and entered the private room. The atmosphere seemed to be quite enthusiastic. In comparison, Luo Nan's family, who were still in the lobby, were in a more difficult time. This was because of what had happened before and Luo Shuqing's nearly uncontrollable emotions. Many people raised their eyebrows. The lobby manager also came over to ask if they needed any help. He probably felt that Luo Nan's family was in a weak position in the conflict just now. Luo Shuqing was just about to call the police, but her husband stopped her. She suppressed her uncontrollable emotions with great difficulty. Luo Shuqing felt that she shouldn't say anything right now. She should immediately go home. No, she should go to the hospital. Luo Nan's current state was far too worrying. His head was lowered from beginning to end, not saying a single word. Based on Luo Shuqing's understanding of children, she felt that Luo Nan's entire being was in an extremely gloomy state. His emotions were suppressed, and it seemed that he would explode at any moment. What she was most worried about was, would this sort of stimulation affect Luo Nan's mind? Right when Luo Shuqing was fidgeting restlessly, Luo Nan opened his mouth and said, "I'm hungry." Then he picked up his chopsticks and began to eat the food that had been placed on the dining table. This wasn't a very polite action, but it more or less displayed a rational attitude. Luo Shuqing and Mo Haiheng glanced at each other. They didn't have any intentions of defying Luo Nan. They ate silently as well. No one was able to taste the food. Even the most ignorant Mo Peng didn't have the mood to play games. He looked at this and looked at that, his fat face wrinkling. The dinner ended hastily, and the family took a car home. Luo Shuqing's emotions, which she had been suppressing in public, completely erupted in the car within the privacy of her own home. Despicable and shameless mad dogs. They've been restrained in Quantum Corporation for 5 years, and this father and son are biting anyone they see. This was the first time in Mo Peng's life that he had seen his mother use profanity. He was truly stupefied as he watched. Luo Shuqing wanted to say more, but Mo Haiheng spoke in a low voice. "He's asleep." Luo Shuqing was slightly stunned. She leaned forward slightly and looked at the front passenger seat. Luo Nan was leaning against the back of the seat, sleeping. She suppressed all the words she had in her stomach. Luo Nan's reaction was abnormal no matter how she looked at it. The husband and wife looked at each other once more. They could see the worry in each other's eyes. Luo Nan could only apologize to his aunt and uncle for their worry. He actually hadn't slept. He just wanted to be quiet for a moment and organize his thoughts. But right now the emotions in his heart were churning. How could he calm down? He had been disturbed time and time again, so he could only shift his consciousness elsewhere. The second-level interface of the drawing software opened up on his retina through the external neuron. The interface here clearly had a subtle corresponding relationship with his mental plane. The turbid river water surged with waves, forming a whirlpool of its own. It was as if the whirlpool was a clear indication of his fluctuating emotions. Thousands of playing cards floated along with the whirlpool, forming a chaotic mess. Only the 3 believers in the format pyramid remained relatively stable. Luo Nan's gaze cut past Xie Junping and Cat Eyes. It didn't stop there. In the end, it fell upon the Wraith sign on the technician level. Chapter 99. The red light signified that the Wraith sign was devouring. In reality, it was devouring Luo Nan's restless and violent fury. The Wraith sign was born from devouring the negative emotions of the human heart. It was restricted by the heavily chained crow here, so it was impossible for it to harm Luo Nan's vital energy. But when such intense emotions squeezed in, it was tantamount to releasing a layer of restriction. As the red light gradually flourished, the Wraith sign sprayed out thousands of lines. It was similar to Luo Nan's sketches, but it was 10 times faster. In an instant, a complex and malevolent structure was constructed. 6 eyes lined up, each with a different color. 8 claws extended to the side, merging with the human body. Such a demonic and ugly image was the human-faced arachnid. When this image was completed, Luo Nan's restlessness on the mental plane had already reached the point where it was ready to gush out. Within the format pyramid, the human-faced arachnid prepared to pounce, and Luo Nan's mind leaped. In an instant the world changed. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly separated from the car. His mental senses broke free from the shackles and expanded to the limit in all directions. Luo Nan's soul left his body at this moment. The SUV carrying his main body drove off into the distance. Only his soul remained here, occupying an empty plain. Luo Nan didn't feel lonely at all. This was because the range of his mental senses instantly increased explosively by 100 times, 1,000 times. The splendidly lit metropolis, the crisscrossing and speeding stream of cars, the entangled and restless living beings, an inconceivable scene was formed in this moment, smashing into Luo Nan's mind. Roar! Luo Nan cast off all his worries, restraints, and burdens. He ignored the inherent logic of the bustling metropolis and the multitude of living beings. He only responded to the most direct and violent emotions in his heart. He faced the sky and roared. The heavily chained crow rattled and trembled on his soul body, swimming endlessly. And at the front of the chain, the malevolent and ugly human-faced arachnid felt Luo Nan's violent emotions. It faced the sky and roared in response. The two forces interweaved together, forming a surging psychic wave that rapidly spread in all directions. The majestic metropolis seemed to be slightly stifled at this moment. Then it returned to its established routine, as if it wasn't affected at all. On the contrary, the hundreds of crows that had already entered their nests flew up in fright. They attracted the attention of the nearby residents and passers-by, bringing a bit of restless emotions. This kind of intelligent bird seemed to have a spiritual sense that was difficult for ordinary people to reach. It felt the impact of the restlessness in the air and found it difficult to stay in its nest. Luo Nan calmed down after venting out his soul howl. At the very least, he could still think logically. In the soul state, without the stimulation of various hormones, the influence of emotions was reduced. He could ignore Yen Yongbua's deep malice, and he could grit his teeth and forget the mockery and humiliation that pierced his bottom line. He could only grab the last bit of valuable information from the turbid currents that blocked his rationality. He saw me as a fetus. When the wilderness laboratory was in turmoil, he was there, and he was still on our side. But at that time, it was only 2 years after Yen Hong's report and shameless plagiarism. The continuous stripping of veins brought Luo Nan a bit closer to the truth of the past. Luo Yuandao's research in the wilderness could be divided into 3 stages. After the Third World War until the mid-60s, he traveled all over the world without a fixed residence. Then came the most stable scientific research period, which lasted until the end of the 1970s. In the past 15 years, it was also the most fruitful period. Starting from the year 79, his grandfather had mental problems, and the laboratory was in turmoil. Bo Qingwen died, and the entire research work came to a halt. The entire family returned to the city. Based on Yen Yongbua's approximate age, it was very likely that he joined at the end of the scientific research period or before the period of turmoil. This was a very delicate point. He should have been preparing back then. Then Yen Yongbua must be someone in the know. Perhaps he was a participant. He must be. Yen Hong's whereabouts were unknown, but his son had come out. Could his father be far away? Luo Nan's soul was submerged in the lights of the city, but there was an indescribable throbbing emotion in his heart that gradually became clear. So I still have a chance for revenge? The aerial struggle for honor was destined to be a dull and tedious path. But Luo Nan had no other choice before tonight. But now the situation was different. Luonan suddenly laughed in spite of himself. This was a pure joy of the mind, but it also had a subtle connection with his main body. Though his main body had gone far away with the SUV, and the distance was already over 10 kilometers, there was always a thread of spiritual response that remained. As long as this response continued, he would not reach his limit. He would even be able to realize some small interactions. This information did not come out of thin air. Luonan looked at the human-faced arachnid that was controlled by the chains. This vicious and ugly Darksider life form maintained its usual obedience, but there was an unending stream of energy that carried some information that was transmitted over. This information was combined with Luonan's own experiences, allowing Luonan to come to a new conclusion. Luonan gradually understood in his mind that it was originally impossible for him to achieve the out-of-body state at his current level. Forcefully doing it would probably result in his soul flying away and scattering. He was only able to maintain it due to the assistance of the human-faced arachnid and the blood transfusion. But in the end, it was the heavily chained crow of the self-format that subdued this Darksider life form. Only then was he able to realize this marvelous arrangement. This form was just like in the legend. They used the power of evil to summon and enslave demons and ghosts. This caused Luonan to have an epiphany in his mind. The self-format manifested itself as control. It was very stupid to use one's own strength to fight. The most correct choice was to unearth the abilities and power of the human-faced arachnid, a summoned creature. Unfortunately, he only had one summoned creature right now. It was the human-faced arachnid avatar formed from the Wraith sign. Its abilities were powerful, but it was hard to display it in the open. But right now, he could only make do with it. Luonan's mind stabilized. His soul body floated down onto the back of the human-faced arachnid. The lich beneath him leaped up noiselessly. It locked onto a direction and directly leaped into the void. A distance of over 100 meters was traversed in a single flash. This was much more powerful than when he was on the warship. Luonan's mind was a bit at ease. He was just about to use his heart to experience this feeling. But his heart stirred slightly. Then he saw a black shadow flapping its wings. It swept past at a low altitude and let out a coarse caw from its mouth. It was a crow. It had a very large head, and when it reached a certain position behind him, it no longer moved forward. Instead, it flew in circles, feeling a bit lost. Ink. Luonan's mental senses covered over and he finally confirmed. Wasn't this the pet crow he used to practice hypnosis? Luonan carefully sized up the surrounding area. Sure enough, it was a bit familiar. It turned out that their family had passed through the River Wu district on their way back to the city. And this place wasn't too far from Blue Bay Community. Chapter 100. It was said that the intelligence of crows surpassed that of a 7-year-old child. He didn't know if it was because of Ink's innate talent or the effect of hypnosis, but Ink's intelligence was clearly higher than others of its kind, and its intuition was also better. It circled a few times, but it was unable to see the silhouette of Luonan. It folded its wings and landed on a protruding area of the outer wall of a skyscraper. It looked all around and it scratched and hissed. It was clearly using its usual method to arouse Luonan's attention. Right now, Luonan's soul body was no more than 700 meters away. His heart stirred slightly when he saw Ink act like this. The heavily chained crow clattered as psychic waves converged and shot toward Ink. This was originally just Luonan's attempt, but Ink clearly quivered in his senses. The feathers on its body stood up, and it immediately turned its head. It was impossible to see anything in the dark night, but after a moment of hesitation, it still flapped its wings and flew toward the location of Luonan's soul body. It began to fly and glide around after arriving in this area. It seemed as if it could really sense Luonan's existence. Good boy! Luonan felt a bit gratified. He tried using this brand new method to communicate with Ink. The results were indeed much better than simple hypnosis. The feedback he received from ink was even more direct and clear. There was a great feeling of telepathy. The human-faced arachnid's 6 heterochromatic eyes adjusted their angles. It seemed to be paying attention to this new comrade. Of course, the human-faced arachnid's avatar didn't possess any self-awareness. This was just a two-way connection that originated from Luonan. Luonan felt that he was like a wizard of the ancient era. The heavily chained crow was his artifact. It was like a giant python coiled around his soul body. The human-faced arachnid was a demon that he summoned. The crow was a spirit bird that he tamed. His power was displayed through this method. Time was of the essence. Luonan could not waste too much time because of ink. Right when he was about to have ink return, a subtle stimulus was transmitted back to him from his main body. Luonan was stupefied for a moment, but he soon discerned that the stimulus came from the hexaear. This miniature instrument manifested an inconceivable effect. After it detected that Luonan's main body was lacking in consciousness, it actually captured the subtle sensation of his out-of-body soul. It transformed the information into an even purer psychic wave. Through the sensing frequency, it traversed several dozen kilometers and accurately entered Luonan's mental plane. The message was a conversation request, and it was accompanied by a notification from the psychic wave network. Do you want to turn on the remote sensing function? If he refused to activate it, the conversation would automatically be skipped. It was equivalent to the owner being in a deep sleep state. What an incredible invention! Luonan couldn't help but pay his respects to the legendary President Ouyang. Without a doubt, the inventor must have fully considered the situation of the out-of-body experience to design such a function. Just from this point of view, what Octopus had described in the afternoon regarding President Ouyang's superb attainments in the field of mental enhancement was very reasonable. Luonan pondered for a moment, then chose to open the call. This was because he saw that the one who requested the call was actually Cragburst. Cragburst and Luonan were both members of the Wilderness Explorers Society. Cragburst had been at the same restaurant as Luonan, but the two had never met face to face. Luonan reckoned that Cragburst probably wanted to pull him together for a get-together or something like that. Luonan didn't have such thoughts right now, but he wanted to confirm the situation over at the restaurant with Cragburst. As the remote sensing function was activated, the information from both sides collided in the night sky through the guidance of psychic wave. Luonan, who was in his soul-body state, was inexplicably a bit absent-minded. This was a completely different experience compared to his normal state of communication. Cragburst's thick voice rang out in the instant Luonan's mind wandered. It looked like he was someone who habitually used the hexaear as a phone. "Mr. Luo, you left?" Luonan was baffled as to why Cragburst was so sure. Could it be that Cragburst ran to the hall to find him? He paused for a moment before replying with a lie that wasn't a lie. "Yeah, I'm with my family." Cragburst let out a laugh. "You really left just like that? You're so boring. You're not even going to get your face back? It's a shame that I drank less alcohol to come find you." Luonan was speechless for a time. Sure enough, good things don't go out, but bad things travel 1,000 miles. If things continued at this pace, his embarrassing appearance in the restaurant would soon spread throughout the society. Cragburst was a wonderful person. His thinking was very straightforward. He probably felt that Luonan had lost face and wanted to get it back. It looked like he was very happy to participate. Unfortunately, Luonan's current state made it hard for him to directly borrow Cragburst's strength. "Wait a minute." Luonan stared at Ink, who was leisurely circling in the air. A thought suddenly appeared in his mind. "Is your party over? I'm not drinking anymore. Of course we're disbanding. What do you want?" Cragburst clearly wanted the world to be in chaos. In the past, Luonan would have had a headache dealing with this sort of person. But right now, this was exactly what he wanted. "I still need some time before I can get there. Have they left yet?" "It seems they're progressing quite quickly." If you're a bit late, then you won't have any hope. Holy crap, they're out. Even a working meal isn't this fast. Did the negotiations between the Rainbow Fund and the Construction Society go smoothly, or did they part on bad terms? Luonan was disinclined to think about it. He looked at Ink once more and spoke to Cragburst. Help me keep an eye on them. Share your location and keep in contact. I'll hurry over and meet up with you. Stalking them, right? That's not a problem. But are you sure you can make it over in time? You don't need me to help you intercept them or something. Not for now. Okay then. Let me know if you need me. My Tiger Burst hasn't made a profit since I bought it. Thanks a lot. Luonan didn't say anything more to this big guy who insisted on joining in on the fun. He hung up and gazed at Ink in the sky once more. Ink seemed to feel Luonan's gaze as it let out two rough squawks. Its plume feathers trembled, and it glided more and more cheerfully within the multicolored haze of light. The heavily chained crow's swimming speed above Luonan's soul body increased. The human-faced arachnid beneath Luonan also felt this change. It raised its bewitching and ugly head, and its 6 eyes flickered. It let out a hiss that only existed on the mental plane. Xia City didn't have a true night. All sorts of neon lights built a mottled sky that belonged exclusively to this moment. It was mixed with the rhythm of a carnival that existed everywhere. It seeped into the hearts of every single person who was still wandering outside. Cragburst opened the car window and let the manic heavy metal music spray wantonly. It was accompanied by surging musical phrases as he roared loudly. He completely ignored the gazes cast by the stream of cars outside. Smash your chest open and embrace the gentleness of blood. Oh. Probably no one would think that this fellow was doing stalking work. Cragburst didn't have this sort of self-awareness. From his perspective, as long as he ensured that the target car in front of him didn't leave his field of vision, then everything would be fine. Tear my throat apart. Kiss. Holy crap. A crow that could be described as brave and fierce flitted across the hood of his car. It scraped the front window and leaped over the roof of his car. It was admittedly thrilling and exciting, but it completely disrupted the rhythm of his music. For this reason, he extended his hand out the window and pointed his middle finger to the sky. Hurry up and smash your head to death. Experience my wrath. Oh. At this time, the Hexaear transmitted a message. It was Luonan. Keep up the speed. I'm coming. Chapter 101. Cragburst stared blankly as a sturdy crow charged in from outside the car window. The crow bumped into the thick leather of the seat, then fell down and landed on the back seat. The 2 feathers that had fallen were blown out of the window by the strong wind that was blowing in and out of the carriage. But in the end, this uninvited guest stayed. Mr. Luo? Yes, it's me. The crow straightened its body and cawed twice. The sound was coarse and unpleasant to the ears, but it surprisingly matched the heavy metal roaring in the car. Of course, the real way to respond was through the Hexaear. Cragburst never would have thought that the so-called "I'm coming" would be this kind of situation. For a moment, he forgot that the crow's sharp claws had already scratched the surface of the genuine leather seat. He widened his eyes and looked up and down several times. Spiritually enhanced people have so many tricks up their sleeves. What is this, a summoner? You share senses with this bird? Yes, that's about it. Since Cragburst had spoken like this, Luonan took advantage of the situation to admit it. This was to avoid looking for other reasons that would make his story full of flaws. Looks like a lot of people have underestimated you. To be able to attach oneself to a flexible object and share one's senses is a brilliant move of the soul sense division. Without the corresponding talent, even an awakened would find it hard to do it beautifully. It's just too wretched. Cragburst curled his lips. He was a muscle-oriented person, so he wasn't too fond of cloning and incarnation technique. However, the other party hadn't awakened yet, and he was a toothpick guy who was seriously biased towards other subjects. It was already quite good that he could use such a method. In particular, his attitude of seeking revenge for the smallest grievance and never letting a grudge rest overnight was even more praiseworthy. At this moment, Ink jumped twice on the leather seat and spread its wings to fly again. The Tiger Burst was a military-modified off-road vehicle. The interior of the vehicle was extremely spacious. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to fit a big fellow like Crag Burst. However, it was still a little difficult for Ink, which had a body length of nearly 70 centimeters and a wingspan of nearly 1 meter, to flap its wings. After flapping twice, it couldn't exert any strength. Crag Burst laughed out loud as he watched. He directly extended his hand, grabbed Ink, and placed it on the control panel. Here, the view is the best. Did you see that? There are 2 cars in front, the blue MPV. Ink's sharp toes gripped the edge of the dashboard, and it stood very steadily. Its black eyes stared at the target car in front of it with great concentration. What do you think? Do you want to do it? Crag Burst had always wanted to play big. No. I don't need it for now, Luonan responded simply. Crag Burst was a bit disappointed. It wasn't a good time to roar his songs right now. On the contrary, he was bored, so he casually chatted. I originally thought you were going to ask Vice Chairman He for help. You even wanted to pull Zhou Hu along when you left. You actually didn't contact him? Why, Sister He. Luonan was a bit speechless. Could it be that he gave people the feeling that he was the type to go find his parents after getting beaten up? Well, He Wayne wasn't his parent either. On the contrary, this woman, who came from the military, had a typical businesslike personality. Using her own personal matters to ask for help would only make people look down on her. This is my personal matter, I shouldn't let others handle it. Brother Crag Burst, many thanks for helping to keep watch for so long. Leave the rest to me. What? You're going to kick me just like that? Crag Burst wasn't happy. It looks like you're not going to make a move tonight? Yeah. It involves a complicated case from over 10 years ago. I want to understand it in depth. It's mainly to investigate. Crag Burst still didn't give up. Are you sure? You're a bird, and it took a lot of effort to fly over here. Can you keep up? The flying speed of a bald crow was considered normal among birds. Even though Ink had been nurtured by Luonan and its body had grown, its speed was only around 70 kilometers per hour. It really wasn't possible to keep up with Ink in a situation where the traffic was smooth and there wasn't any congestion. The problem was that Luonan never expected Ink to be able to do it. He had Ink come over and appear in front of Crag Burst, just to find a reason to cover up. True reconnaissance still needed to rely on something else. Luonan's soul body was floating in the air above the traffic layer while he was chatting with Crag Burst. He avoided close contact with an awakened like Crag Burst and advanced in sync with the flow of traffic. The range of his senses exceeded 500 meters. The target's blue van was already covered within. 2 rounds of penetrating scanning had already been carried out. However, this low-key blue van's outer shell material seemed to be quite extraordinary. A certain amount of interference would appear every time the vehicle was scanned. It made it very hard to determine the number of people inside and the location. Luonan's heart grew vigilant after 2 unsuccessful attempts. Everything went quite smoothly before, but it seemed that his reconnaissance was a bit too direct. And at this moment, the alarm device within the van was triggered. There was no sound, but a glaring red light shone. The dark-skinned bodyguard in the driver's seat had a penetrating gaze. His gaze swept outside the window. Darksider life form? Yen Yongbua, who had been resting with his eyes closed, slowly opened his eyes. But the alarm light suddenly extinguished at this time. Yen Yongbua couldn't help muttering. Could it be that we've passed through the domain of a human-faced arachnid? Or is there an out-of-body mental traversing expert paying attention to us? We've been tailed. The dark-skinned bodyguard suddenly spoke. The projector turned on at this time, displaying a real-time satellite image of the surrounding area. The car's AI combined this image with the automatic recording content of the van. It quickly analyzed and marked out a few suspicious targets. The targets with the highest probability were circled in an eye-catching red frame. It was an eye-catching and domineering military-modified Tiger Burst SUV. Its volume was like that of a small armored vehicle. It had a rough four-wheeled structure that could truly gallop through the wilderness. It seemed out of place in the bustling metropolis. This car has been following us ever since we left the restaurant, and the monitoring system shows that the words blue van were mentioned. The military? This sort of arrogant tailing method really did seem like the method of some arrogant soldier or valiant general. However, when Yen Yongbwa squinted his eyes to look carefully, he was able to capture a sturdy crow beneath the car's window through the high-resolution image. Clearly, this wasn't some sort of decoration. Interesting. Investigate the details. Oh, hold on. We're in the River Wu district right now? Yes. Then let's use a different method. Yen Yongbwa slowly rubbed his fingers. Then he pulled outwards lightly. Inexplicably, a fine soft needle was pulled out from the skin and flesh of his fingertip. The scene was bizarre beyond compare. The soft needle was as thick as a strand of hair. It was only around 5 centimeters long. One could see that it was made of metal. But in Yen Yongbwa's hands, it looked like it was made of flour. He rubbed the soft needle twice in his hand. When he opened his hand again, the soft needle magically transformed into a metal beetle the size of a grain of rice. Yen Yongbwa opened the window and flicked the beetle out of the car with a flick of his finger. Tell Jack that it's time to upgrade the hardware. If he wants to obtain the top-notch configuration, then he needs to work harder. Look in the junk of that car. Chapter 102. Let's continue. I'll be your driver for free today. You can treat me later, or you can tell my fortune or something. Can psychics tell fortunes? Telling the location of an enemy. Asking for the location of a goddess. This is also changing fate. Why isn't it called fortune-telling? Crag burst grinned in laughter. He looked down the car window and saw Ink's earnest appearance. He couldn't help but reach out to pinch Ink's neck. Hey, do you feel like you're being petted on the head? Luonan wouldn't tell him that Ink was just a cover to coax him. He simply replied, "Stop messing around." Luonan's all-encompassing mental senses were inexplicably touched. The window of the blue MPV in front had clearly opened up a crack. It was as if something was ejecting out. It was extremely small and its speed was very fast. It collided with the car behind it in practically an instant. Then the senses were interrupted. The Tiger Burst Jeep and the blue MPV were separated by 2 cars. The senses were interrupted twice. When they reappeared, they were already on the hood of the Tiger Burst Jeep. Luonan's mental senses always had a resolution problem. This time was no exception. He could only faintly sense that it was a tiny beetle-like object. It seemed to have pierced through the 2 cars in the middle before pouncing onto the Tiger Burst Jeep. Then he completely lost his senses. At this time, all 4 windows of the Jeep rose up, forming a sealed space. Without the whistling of the wind outside, the rumbling of heavy metal was much more ear-piercing. Crag Burst was a bit startled. He snapped his fingers. "Open the window!" The voice control command was given, but the car's AI didn't respond at all. Not only that, but the car even began to slow down and turn. Luonan's warning cut in. "Careful, there's something, F***ck me. I've been bewitched." Crag Burst cursed at practically the same time, but he soon calmed down. In the next few seconds, he tried using hand control, voice control, and other methods, but it was useless. The windows couldn't be opened, the speed couldn't be changed, and even the stereo couldn't be adjusted. The car's AI firmly controlled the Tiger Burst Jeep. It turned into a downward trajectory, circling around the skyscraper, and spiraled down. "Is it a virus?" Crag Burst judged. "No, it's more like a mechanical bug." Luonan spoke of his observations. In any case, someone is controlling it from a distance. Cragburst came up with the most reasonable explanation. We've been discovered. Aside from Cragburst and Luonan, no one could see that the AI in this arrogant and domineering military-modified Tiger Burst had already gone out of control. The jeep moved steadily along with the rolling traffic, but it was getting further and further away from its target. At this moment, Cragburst and Ink were imprisoned in this sealed space. They didn't know where they would be taken. Cragburst stopped all of his attempts to seize back control. He swept his eyes over the constantly changing environment outside the car. His eyes unexpectedly flickered with an exceptionally excited light, and the corners of his mouth perked up once more. He turned his head to Moswe. You must have been discovered, but they are targeting this car. You can continue. As soon as he finished speaking, he heavily elbowed the car window beside him. The tough bulletproof glass instantly exploded into fine cracks like a spider web. If intelligence wasn't enough, violence would make up the difference. Cragburst's eyes didn't even blink when he treated his beloved car in such a manner. He extended his hand and tore down the glass window that was already on the verge of collapse. He casually tossed it into the back seat. His other hand suddenly grabbed Ink. He didn't care how the bird struggled, and he simply tossed it out the window. Go! Don't let me down! Ink was forcefully tossed several dozen meters away, just in time to avoid the downward trajectory of light. It spread its wings, just in time to avoid the tragedy of smashing into the glass curtain wall of the building. Luonan shouted through the hexaear, "What the hell are you doing? I want to know what they're doing." Cragburst laughed boldly. His bored attitude from before was completely swept away. You go keep an eye on them first. Keep in touch. I want to see where they can take me. He extended his hand out from the broken window and waved. Then a hoarse and berserk roar rang out, "Smash your chest open. Embrace the gentleness of blood." Oh, Ink spiraled within the neon glowing mist. Luonan's soul body hovered motionlessly in the center of Ink's spiraling and fluttering axis. 2 seconds ago, the blue jeep carrying Yen Yongbwa had left the range of his senses. Actually, if he really wanted to give chase, he could easily catch up to them with the speed of his soul body flying through space. However, so what if he caught up? The anti-reconnaissance equipment on the jeep raised Luonan's vigilance greatly. If he continued to forcefully chase after them, not only would he alert the enemy, but he would also expose his identity and abilities. Luonan's thoughts spun rapidly, and he made a decision in the blink of an eye. Cragburst was clearly worth paying more attention to. Yen Yongbwa had taken the initiative to help. Right now, the jeep had gone out of control and Luonan was in danger. Luonan would feel uneasy if he didn't help. Also, Luonan was quite concerned about that mechanical bug. Luonan's soul body suddenly descended, carrying Ink as it chased behind the Tiger Burst jeep. The Tiger Burst jeep maintained a stable speed, and its direction was the same from start to finish. The jeep continued to descend after changing tracks twice to switch traffic layers. The tyrannical body of the jeep continuously ran parallel to several low-altitude public transport vehicles. They intersected and plunged head first into the suddenly dimmed layer. The jeep passed through the dividing line between light and darkness. The clamor of the metropolis was suddenly separated by a layer in everyone's senses. Even the heavy metal vibrating within the jeep seemed to be rendered with a layer of irritation. The jeep's headlights cut through the outer walls of the surrounding buildings. The damaged outer walls, the messy graffiti, and some suspicious black and red colors converged together. The recycling layer, due to the phototaxis of living things, people would always yearn for areas with fresh air and sunlight. This was especially true in the bustling area of the city center. The skyscrapers were dense, and the low-altitude transportation network extended in all directions. The residents of the city would go up and down. Sometimes they wouldn't truly set foot on the ground for several years. A low-altitude public transport 30 meters above the ground was already the limit for most people to descend. This was how the high-altitude race got their name. The problem was that Xia City was an enormous city with a population of 200 million. It never had the qualifications to waste space. It was inevitable that there would be some people within the population of 200 million who had to survive in the dark and damp space of the lower levels. Without a doubt, this was the slum of the modern city. It was the recycling layer that specialized in disposing of the city's trash. To a certain degree, it was also a place where gangs gathered outside the law. The Tiger Burst Jeep roared as it charged down from the upper levels. It practically instantly attracted the gazes of a large number of professionals in this gloomy space. A sharp whistling sound rang out. Between the buildings, within the ever-narrowing alleys, high-powered modified motorcycles started up one after another. They sped along at high speed. People of all shapes and sizes on the motorcycles brandished malevolent spiked clubs, chains, and of course, firearms. They howled and cursed at the jeep that was still advancing along the light rail in midair. At the same time, they were also looking forward to it. Chapter 103. The light rail ahead has been destroyed. Automatically switching to off-road mode. The car's AI automatically issued an order. Several seconds later, the enormous Tiger Burst Jeep slid down from the final port. Its 4 wheels landed on the ground, and it rolled over the primitive and shabby asphalt road as it continued forward. 20 to 30 people had already gathered together. They were the nearby gangs and motorcycle gang members. They cheered in unison. There were even more daring people who sped up and used their spikes to push against the side of the jeep. They sped up, leaving behind clear and distorted scratches on the jeep's body. And when they passed by the car window, they made a humiliating gesture towards Crag Burst. "You pig flaunting your wealth. I'm going to poke your ass until it explodes." Crag Burst cracked a smile and returned the same gesture. "Come. I'm afraid you're not tough enough." The curses outside grew even louder, but Crag Burst didn't care in the slightest. He looked all around him, comparing the surroundings to his memories from his early years. If he remembered correctly, the road the jeep was driving on had nearly 30 years of history. It was originally designed to be some sort of main road in the city. Moreover, it was connected to some transportation route in the wilderness. It was a two-way road with 12 lanes. No matter how you looked at it, it was a fairly high standard. But in the decades that followed, enormous changes occurred in the city's planning. Countless skyscrapers rose from the ground, and their shadows covered the road from all sides. The buildings protruded horizontally, cutting the enormous road into fragments. They completely covered the sky above the road. Following the complete abandonment of the management of the recycling stratum, this road could only be submerged in the layers of shadows of the skyscrapers. The illegal buildings of the surrounding residents wantonly covered both sides of the road. At this moment, there were countless eyes within those grotesquely shaped buildings. They stared intently at the jeep that whistled past. It was hard to understand what they meant. So many years have passed and this damned place is still a mess. What are the gangs in charge of this area doing? Crag Burst placed his arm across the empty car window frame and shouted towards the outside. "Hey, whose territory is this? Don't you guys usually clean up?" The gang members outside the jeep paused for a moment. Then their threats and curses grew louder by more than 10 times. There were already people who couldn't bear it any longer. They drove their motorcycles closer, and the sound of air being cut rang out. A thick and long steel chain lashed through the car window. It was a force that could split a person's skull open. Crag Burst just lifted his arm and let the chain smash against it. He even coiled it twice before swinging it slightly. The person who attacked was like a kite that had lost control. He flew from his beloved high-displacement motorcycle and was smashed horizontally. This was too ruthless. The motorcycles at the back couldn't dodge in time. In an instant, half of the motorcycles were flipped over. It was a mess. Modified humans. No one knew who shouted this, but the motorcycles that accompanied them all the way dispersed. Some people had already braked and stopped on the spot, no longer following them. But at this moment, a motorcycle that was originally behind them sped up and soon ran alongside the off-road vehicle. The rider grinned maliciously at the car, raised the thick barrel with one hand, and pulled the trigger. The classic shotgun instantly ejected 12 8mm tungsten alloy pellets, covering the entire front of the carriage. Without even looking at the result, the knight swung his arm and loaded the gun. He was about to do it again. But when he raised the muzzle of the gun once more, what met the muzzle was Cragburst's malevolent smile. Cragburst's face was completely unharmed. There was a muffled bang as the rider flew up from the motorcycle. He crossed 8 lanes of traffic and flew into the illegal buildings at the far end. Cragburst leapt out from the car window and took his place. He sat steadily on the motorcycle and snatched the classic shotgun. He roared and used the shotgun like an iron rod. He rushed forward and rushed back, knocking down a group of reckless gangsters in the blink of an eye. He had been cooped up in the car for over 10 minutes, acting as a moving prisoner. That feeling wasn't good at all. The motorcycle beneath him was a bit small compared to his body size, but the feeling of being able to move according to his will and move at will was really great. Cragburst laughed heartily and accompanied the Tiger Burst off-road vehicle. He roared to his heart's content along with the surging melody. As the vehicle advanced forward, the gangsters who had fallen to the ground quickly disappeared without a trace. Only Cragburst and the off-road vehicle remained on the road for a time. Cragburst was singing to his heart's content when he suddenly stooped down and accelerated without any warning. He pulled away at least a body's length of distance in an instant. He caught a glimpse of a line of fire cutting through from the corner of his eye. A hole the size of a washbasin appeared on the road 20 meters behind him. Only then did he hear a peculiar hissing sound enter his ears. Cragburst chuckled. It was a large-caliber electromagnetic rifle. However, the shooter's aim was terrible to the extreme. That's not right. The shooter didn't have any intention of following up after missing the target. He suddenly sensed something and followed the trajectory of the bullet. He couldn't see any human figures within the pitch-black floor, but there was a pitch-black bird flapping its wings and flying. Cragburst grinned and transmitted through the hexaear. Where's the division of labor? Where's the trust? Speaking of which, you should be pretty good at scouting. How about we go back and give the wilderness a try? Then you need to be prepared to be tricked, Luonan casually replied. He used ink to announce his existence to Cragburst. But what truly killed the sniper was actually the human-faced arachnid's siege hammer. Right now, the pitiful fellow had fainted in front of the window. He probably didn't understand what was going on from start to finish. Luonan's sole body floated within this dangerous area. The range of his senses was close to a kilometer in diameter. An omnidirectional, multi-layered, panoramic picture was presented to him. He suddenly discovered that he should be the most genuine sniper at this very moment. He was in existence like a ghost. He had a panoramic perception with a diameter of a kilometer. Of course, he also had the siege hammer, which could ignore the vast majority of physical defenses. These factors converged together. He could be said to be like a fish in water in this complex environment. He could eliminate those malicious personnel in the quickest and most convenient manner. Luonan truly had some awareness of being an ability user when he used these methods. Yes, this was the ability user of his imagination. This was an extraordinary power that stood above the normal world. Naturally, this was the best proof of the correctness of formatting theory. It was also at this time that Luonan truly understood what kind of restriction his weak fleshly body was when it came to his true abilities. Hey Scout, go ahead and update your intelligence. This instance's level is too low. Did your enemy specifically use this place to annoy me? Luonan responded. I feel like you should stop the car and properly inspect it. Maybe you can find some clues. Good idea. But this doesn't contradict with scouting ahead. I need a tool. It's best if it's a moving obstacle that can stop my disobedient baby. Let me look. Chapter 104. Crag Burst's military-modified Tiger Burst SUV was an extremely astonishing vehicle for personal transportation. It could run over the heads of ordinary private cars in its off-road mode. However, the big fellow that had just run into the range of Luo Nan's mental senses could completely replicate a similar scene onto the Tiger Burst SUV. 5 seconds after Luo Nan discovered it, the enormous shadow that slowly pressed over finally attracted Crag Burst's attention. The enormous size of the shadow caused Crag Burst, who had been wild and fearless the entire time, to gape subconsciously. He forgot to speak for a time. It was a super-heavy road roller. It was over 5 meters tall, and its enormous body occupied 2 car lanes horizontally. It was completely the willful piling of industrial power. Just the vibrating wheels in front of it already exceeded the roof of the Tiger Burst SUV. Perhaps this big fellow was a large tool used in the construction of this main road back in the day. Its appearance was already extremely old. The driver's compartment was already missing its top, and its entire body was covered in grotesque graffiti. However, it had undergone certain modifications. Long and sharp blades were installed on both sides of the vibrating wheels. This allowed it to cover the width of over 4 car lanes. The weight of the vehicle was at least 50 tons. The already damaged asphalt road became even more tragic under the effect of the vibrating wheels as it drove past. Of course, the antique road roller's speed was very ordinary. It definitely didn't exceed 30 kilometers per hour. If the SUV were to turn around, it would be completely easy for this old fellow to eat the dust behind it. Or it could make a small detour and easily pass by it. But the problem was that the AI that controlled the SUV's movements didn't have any awareness that it was about to be smashed into pieces. It continued to maintain its original speed, direction, and route as it moved forward in a perfectly straight line. Hey! Crag Burst did his best to wake his precious up, but it was destined to be futile. The distance between the two sides quickly became 300 meters, 200 meters. The Tiger Burst SUV contributed to the majority of the distance traveled, and it continued to do so. Luo Nan noticed that there were at least 5 gun-wielding personnel in the damaged compartment of the road roller other than the driver. They all raised their gun barrels and pointed them at Crag Burst's position. 2 of them were electromagnetic rifles with astonishing destructive power. Only the heavens knew how these strictly controlled military firearms ended up here. Did the military also dispose of trash here? Out of the way! Luo Nan threw 2 siege hammers over as he warned Crag Burst. The targets were precisely 2 gang members wielding electromagnetic rifles. One of them fell to the ground and fainted. But a bewitching red light suffused the eyes of the other person. He was actually completely unaffected. He quickly adjusted the muzzle of his gun, and flames exploded on it. The metal bullet carried a terrifying initial speed. It crossed a distance of several hundred meters in an instant, directly piercing through the location of Luo Nan's soul body. This shot did not touch anything substantial, but it truly gave Luo Nan a fright. The other party's spiritual sense was very sharp, and his judgment was very accurate. What was even more inconceivable was that he was immune to the siege hammer. Luo Nan had pierced through all of his material defenses, but it seemed that Luo Nan's attack aimed at the mental plane had missed. That gunshot had alarmed Crag Burst. The other 3 firearms had already opened fire at this time. They were old-fashioned gunpowder weapons that were commonly seen in the black market. Their power was quite astonishing. Crag Burst cursed loudly. The motorcycle suddenly sped up and swerved outwards, dodging the whistling rain of bullets. It narrowly brushed past the twisted blades of the road roller. Luo Nan was left behind. Crag Burst let the motorcycle run away crookedly. Crag Burst jumped up, and his strong body easily leapt over 4 meters into the air. He directly stepped onto the cockpit of the road roller and smashed it with a heavy fist. The driver was sent flying from the other side. Only now did the others adjust their muzzles. But no one was able to block Cragburst's fist. They fell from the road roller one after another. Cragburst instantly cleared the obstructions. Then he tried to control the big fellow beneath him to make it stop immediately. As long as it didn't move, Cragburst's beloved Tigerburst Jeep wouldn't be smashed into smithereens even if it couldn't avoid a collision. The distance between the two vehicles was less than 50 meters at this time. A collision and a crushing would only take 2 or 3 seconds. Cragburst had operated this type of large-scale machine before. He felt that he could do it. But then Luonan's sharp warning sound penetrated the bottom of his heart in the form of psychic waves. Dodge! Luonan's lack of professionalism was completely exposed at this critical moment. Though he gave a warning, he didn't indicate the direction of danger. Cragburst needed to make his own judgment. Fortunately, Cragburst had ample experience. He was able to discern the degree of danger from Luonan's hasty attitude. He didn't hesitate at all and leaped out from the cockpit. He didn't even stop on the road roller. He just flipped over. A plump metal pineapple was tossed into the air at nearly the same time as his movements. It fell right into the cockpit. F***ck me. Cragburst was shocked when he saw this scene from the corner of his eyes. A grenade. And it was a defensive grenade with the most terrifying killing radius. This sort of crude old-fashioned weapon had an enormous destructive power. It still had a certain place in the military. It could receive miraculous effects in special situations. The grenade was clearly pressed in someone's hand. The person had calculated the time to ignite it. It exploded with a bang while still in midair. Over 1,000 shrapnel were like a whistling storm, covering a vast space of 50 meters. With such an astonishing killing radius, even the gang members who had just fallen from the car were swept up. They screamed miserably. Cragburst wasn't known for his agility, but his mind worked quickly. He borrowed the force to rebound just as his body landed on the ground. He caught up to the road roller with a stride and stuck his body to the side of the car. His series of judgments couldn't be said to be incorrect, but someone was waiting for him here. A fist came smashing straight at him. The fist's speed and timing were all grasped to the peak of perfection. But the most shocking thing was the inconceivable weight. Cragburst received it with a single hand, but his entire upper arm was forcibly deflected. He could only watch helplessly as the heavy fist smashed into the side of his face. Cragburst soared into the air amidst the flying shrapnel and tumbled to a spot a dozen meters behind the road roller. An enormous rumbling sound came from right in front of the road roller at this time. The 5-ton Tigerburst Jeep collided with the 50-ton road roller at a speed of nearly 100 kilometers per hour. The former's kinetic energy was reduced to zero in an instant. The front of the car caved in and parts exploded in the air. It was a tragic sight to behold. Although the road roller didn't immediately roll over the Jeep, it maintained its previous speed after a slight pause. It continued to push the scrapped Jeep forward. More and more parts of the Jeep were swept up by the vibrating wheels. It seemed that the most miserable fate was unavoidable. Luonan had witnessed everything that had happened before and after the road roller. He was stunned for a time. But at this moment, his attention was placed on the person who had caused all of this. Yes, it was the person who had ignored the human-faced arachnid's siege hammer attack. The person who had played dead when Cragburst boarded the car. Then the person who had tossed out a defensive grenade and seized the opportunity to strike Cragburst down with a heavy punch. Now the person had jumped from the road roller onto the Tigerburst Jeep. Chapter 105. Luonan was already able to clearly see the person's appearance. He was a white man, a rare sight in Xia City. He looked to be in his 40s, maybe a bit older. The scars on his face showed that he had been through a lot. Of course, Luonan had a deeper impression of this person's left eye. It was a mechanical eye. If one looked closely, they would find that there were no decorations on it. The cold metal structure, as well as the red light in the center that made one's heart tremble, made it difficult for one to treat it with a normal heart. This guy isn't a normal human. Luo Nan's mental senses had been covering the target this entire time. He discovered that this person's appearance was just as it indicated. The metal composition and related structures on this person's body were far greater than that of a normal person. They're modified humans, right? Cough, cough, damn it. Crag Burst's voice came through the hexaear. Crag Burst had been struck down from the car by a fist and had been covered by the destructive shrapnel of the grenade. If Crag Burst had been a normal person, he would have died a long time ago. However, Crag Burst had reported his safety to Luo Nan at the first instant. Crag Burst also understood the relevant information of the enemy, displaying his robust physique and experienced. Modified humans? Luo Nan had some understanding of the relevant concept. He saw that there was still some time before Crag Burst would catch up, so he used his senses to scan in greater detail while exchanging information with Crag Burst. You're saying that he's like the military's mechanical warriors? What mech warrior? He's just a modified human. There's no other way to describe it, and this modification has been abolished for almost 20 years, at least on the surface. Is he over 40 years old? Yeah, pretty much. That should be it. He's pretty good at using military equipment and he's pretty good at scamming people. But a guy like him must have special privileges. He has to report to the SCA every year. Why is he here? Crag Burst felt that this was incomprehensible, and so did Luo Nan. The gang members of the recycling stratum might seem lawless, with all kinds of weapons, guns, and grenades, making it a mini arsenal, but that was because the government had basically given up on the governance of the recycling stratum. As a matter of fact, most of them had extremely low clearance due to their criminal records. Under the strict control of the credit clearance network in today's society, they could only be tyrants on the recycling stratum. Once they stepped out of the recycling stratum and into the public, they would be closely monitored. If they did anything sensitive, law enforcement officers would appear above their heads and send them to jail. It was hard to imagine that a special forces soldier who had undergone military modification would come here to make a living. His special authority was as eye-catching as a lighthouse on the SCA's surveillance network. The government would never allow such a dangerous person to work with the gangs in the recycling stratum. As for special situations like committing a monstrous crime, it would be more meaningful for them to escape into the wilderness instead of here. No matter what, this guy has angered me. I will have a good talk with him. Crag Burst gnashed his teeth on the other side. But soon after, he slapped his thigh. Found it. It's here. Keep an eye on him, I'll be right there. He found the high-powered motorcycle that had fallen in the middle of the road, turned around and chased after it. In about half a minute, he would be able to fight for his reputation again. Luo Nan focused his attention on the altered human. Actually, Luo Nan was more interested in this person's current behavior than in identifying his identity. After striking down Crag Burst, the altered human arrived atop the heavily deformed jeep. It tore apart the roof and entered the driver's compartment, which could no longer be seen. Next, the altered human smashed the control panel with a punch. He extended his hand inside and fished for something. Luo Nan couldn't help but associate this scene with the loss of control of the car's AI and the metal bug ejected from Yen Yongbo's car. Without a doubt, Yen Yongbo had done something to the jeep. His methods were certainly closely related to the metal bug that had sunk into the jeep. From then on, the development of the situation deviated from the normal track. And right now, this altered human seemed to be acting as a liaison, a recycler retrieving the metal bug. This kind of behavior was quite compatible with the recycling stratum. And from this point of view, perhaps the metal bug was a very crucial thing. Perhaps it involved some deep secrets of Yen Yongbo's? Luo Nan's mental senses became even more meticulous when he thought of this. Though his soul body couldn't do much right now, He wanted to lock onto the target of the other first before considering his next step. The altered human was certainly aware of his detection, just like how he had sensed the siege hammer. However, his thirst for his target clearly surpassed everything else. He just raised his head and shot a cold glance, but he didn't actually lock onto Luonan's position. He just continued to lower his head and search. Suddenly, the altered human's arm that had extended into the control panel paused for a moment. His cold and stiff face had a change, forming into a slightly sinister smile. Then he pulled his hand out. His fingertips were pinched with a metal bug the size of a grain of rice. It was motionless right now, more like a work of art than a tool. The altered human raised the metal bug before his eyes. It was like he was looking at a treasure, carefully sizing it up. The smile on his face deepened with every glance. The intensity of the red light in his mechanical eyes continued to grow. Luonan took advantage of the metal bug's appearance to use his mental senses to cut across its surface in an attempt to understand its internal structure. But he discovered that it wasn't easy to balance distance and precision at the same time. He was separated by a distance of over 100 meters, and the precision of his senses was at most on the millimeter level. It was already very difficult for him to analyze the interior of the Jeep. Right when Luonan was considering whether or not he should get a bit closer, a high-powered motorcycle rumbled from behind the road roller. Soon, it circled around the reamer and ran alongside the deformed Jeep. Cragburst gave a provocative gesture to the driver's seat atop the motorcycle. "Hey, come at me again if you have the guts. I'll let you use only one hand." The altered human's smile faintly faded. His ice-cold mechanical eyes cut to Cragburst's side, but he didn't immediately respond. Cragburst's provocation continued, but it was mixed with something else. Cragburst, used to be from District 55 of the Coastal Garrison. Give me your name. I'll burn incense for you later. The altered human's lips and teeth opened and closed slightly within the Jeep's driver's seat. He spoke for the first time, but the feeling was that he was mocking Cragburst. "A soldier, you're not?" Cragburst discovered that there was a problem with his judgment, so there was no need for him to be polite. He was just about to exert his strength to leap and attack. But in the next moment, his opponent made an odd move. The altered human opened his mouth and stuck out his tongue. He placed the metal bug between his fingers on it, rolled it up, and sent this toy into his mouth. There was even a clear swallowing motion. He actually swallowed the metal bug. Chapter 106. As soon as he finished speaking, Blackjack leaped up and jumped down from the other side of the cockpit. His timing was perfect. At that moment, the road roller pushed the Jeep to the place where the gang member's car had been flipped over. At that moment, the group of people had yet to leave. They stayed in the middle of the road and looked at the road roller that was moving slowly towards them. At first, they were dumbfounded. Then, they shouted and wanted to drive their motorcycles around it. But at that moment, Jack jumped down from the Jeep and grabbed a motorcycle. He then sped up, circled around the other side of the blade, and sped back in the direction he came from. "You were a boss just a second ago, and now you're dodging?" Cragburst cursed loudly. He lifted the front wheel of the motorcycle and forcefully made a U-turn. The motorcycle scraped dangerously past the twisting blades, and then the engine roared as it accelerated in pursuit. The speed of the two motorcycles was more than 100 kilometers per hour. In the darkness of the night, they disappeared in the blink of an eye. It wasn't a problem for Luonan's soul body to chase after them, but Ink had some difficulties. The two motorcycles had already driven out of his range of senses during his moment of hesitation, and they chased after them. On this side, the road roller pushed the off-road vehicle, rumbling as it rolled over. Everywhere he passed, there was a mess. The gang members cut a sorry figure as they hid to the side of the road. They cursed Cragburst, but even more cursed Jack. Luonan's mind stirred slightly. He listened attentively and discovered that some of the content was very interesting. But it was fragmented and fragmented. he was unable to grasp the gist of it. Because of his attention, ink also came over, and it was very eye-catching. One of the gang members was annoyed and happened to have a gun in his hand. He raised his hand and was about to shoot, but in the blink of an eye, he fell to the ground like a wooden stake, unconscious. The gang members, who had been happily scolding him, were all stunned. They looked at their comrade who had suddenly fainted, then looked up in a daze. At this moment, ink spiraled down and stopped on the eaves of an illegal building by the side of the road. It looked down at the group of weak chickens known as the gang. In the darkness, the black crows stared at you with their dark eyes. On the ground were their companions who had inexplicably fallen because they had offended them. Such a scene made the dozen or so members of the gang at the scene all weak in the knees. Crow continued to remain silent, and the more it was like this, the more anxious and uneasy it was. Luonan actually felt a bit awkward being by Ink's side. He didn't want to stare at each other like this. Gathering information was the most important thing right now. The problem was that Ink was a crow. How could it communicate with humans? It would be better if it was a parrot. He could see the benefits of the hexaear and the psychic wave network right now. Otherwise, he and Cragburst wouldn't have been able to connect. Oh, psychic wave network? Luonan's train of thought jumped once more. If it was just a network connection, then the heavily chained crow within the format pyramid would also count? At this moment, there was an additional image of a crow in the format pyramid. It was Ink, and it was on the second level, which was the staff level. Of course, Luonan didn't understand bird language, but his communication with Ink was telepathic. There were no obstructions at all. Even with the foundation of hypnosis, the smooth communication between the man and the bird was beyond common sense. If it could be done between humans and crows, what couldn't it be done between humans? Luonan made a decision as soon as his thoughts reached this point. First, he needed to establish a connection and use the heavily chained crow. But what value did these gang members have in absorbing them? Luonan was still a bit of a neat freak. He hesitated for a moment before his thoughts spun. Perhaps he could use something else instead? The human-faced arachnid's gloomy, cold, and bizarre gaze swept across the group of gang members. Of course, none of the gang members were able to see the human-faced arachnid. But being targeted by that bizarre crow was enough to make them panic. The group of people were stuck between a rock and a hard place when the crow suddenly spread its wings and screeched. It was hoarse and unpleasant to listen to, causing everyone to shiver. More importantly, a weak yet inexplicably clear voice directly rang out in the depths of their minds at the same time this screech rang out. It coiled at the bottom of their hearts. I ask. You answer. Oh my God! Miserable and panic-stricken cries rang out. Some people turned around and ran. At the same time, there were also people who didn't make a sound. Their eyes rolled back as they fell to the ground. This time Luonan really didn't do anything. This brother was the one who fainted from fright. Of course, the gang members who tried to escape soon received a siege hammer that was neither light nor heavy. They didn't faint, but they were in great pain. They fell to the ground, clutching their heads as they screeched. From start to finish, they saw this savage and bizarre scene. The gang members literally froze to death on the spot. Monsters, mutants, black technology. All sorts of absurd thoughts came and went, but they really didn't dare to move their feet. The road roller rumbled away into the distance, gradually disappearing. The road surface was silent for a time. I asked. You answer. Luonan repeated his previous words. At the same time, he was also paying attention to the changes in the format pyramid. The human-faced arachnid was located on the technician level. It was currently the center of all the changes. Following Luonan's decision, this Darksider species spat out a spider silk-like thread, projecting it into the turbid flow of emotions. The human-faced arachnid was like a skilled fisherman. It used the spider silk to hook up fish one after another. It tossed them to the lowest level of the format pyramid to stand side by side with the images of Xie Jinping and cat eyes. However, they were much fainter. They were like fragile bubbles that could burst at any time. In the real world, there were over a dozen gang members. Without exception, all of them were brought under the control of the human-faced arachnid. There was nothing that could be easier than this when the emotions of fear spread wantonly. As the mastermind behind the scenes, this was the first time Luo Nan saw how the human-faced arachnid controlled its target. He was stupefied for a time. So it was actually this simple? In any case, with the establishment of the local area network and the formation of the mental connection, the following matters would be much easier. A spiritual wave was transmitted from the hexaear approximately 2 minutes later. Cragburst had taken the initiative to contact him. Fuck. Gout, where have you been? Luo Nan was able to guess the result just by listening to the emotions in her voice. You lost them? That black rat. He can't do anything else, but his ability to dig holes in alleys is top-notch, and he even shot from the back. Hey, where's the scouting ahead? Your speed is over 100. I can't keep up. Of course, Crow wasn't able to keep up. Luo Nan obviously wouldn't explain this to Cragburst. F*CK, 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 F*CK. Cragburst let out a string of expletives. You need to pick a useful one for your spirit attachment. You need to be fast. Something like a peregrine falcon or a spear falcon. Aren't they all good? What's with a crow? Luo Nan didn't get angry despite Cragburst's complaint. The more Cragburst complained like this, the more it showed that this big guy who came from the military didn't treat Luo Nan as an outsider. Moreover, Cragburst began to trust and rely on Luo Nan's abilities. This was a very good start. Sure enough, Cragburst came to his senses and felt embarrassed. He coughed twice. Since I know you have this ability, I'll help you buy a good bird from the society later. As long as the price is right, it's not impossible to get a mutant. Sure. You can help me pick one later. Chapter 107. Who the hell knows where I am? Let me look at the map. Oh, River Wu District's Deshang building. The top looks bright and fresh, but the bottom looks like this? Deshang? Luo Nan remembered that this was the information he had just obtained. It looked like Cragburst's pursuit ability couldn't be underestimated. They were already very close to their final target. Wait a moment. I'll be right there. Ink soared into the sky, shuttling back and forth between the intersecting buildings. Luo Nan's soul body rode the human-faced arachnid to the side. The crow's flying speed was really too slow. The human-faced arachnid didn't even use a third of its strength. It followed leisurely and leisurely. Luo Nan didn't put any energy into flying. Instead, he used the panoramic view of his mental senses to observe this dark place that he had heard of for a long time but had never set foot in. The turbid night of the recycling stratum gave him a very subtle feeling. At the very least, he didn't have too many experiences of flying in the night sky. It was more like he was swimming in a stream. And as time passed, the panoramic view cut open the deepest parts of this area and presented them before his eyes. This feeling continued to deepen and mutate. It wasn't just water. It was sewage. Everything presented in the panoramic view. The concrete details were far too jumbled and messy. There was no time to analyze them one by one. However, the things that were briefly scanned, such as gangs, prostitutes, drug dealers, casinos, and the abstractions of violence, lust, greed, numbness, and so on, interweaved and dyed together to form countless turbid colors that splashed over his head and face. Everything converged into a roaring turbid current that washed over the entire recycling stratum. It converged into the surging tide of emotions that drowned the entire Xia city. In the end, this was just a tributary. It was a bit dirtier. The human-faced arachnid was quite comfortable in this environment. It was like a fish in water. But soon Luo Nan discovered that the human-faced arachnid wandered in the turbid current of emotions. It had a slight appetite. Weren't these turbid negative emotions the food it craved the most in the past? This fellow relied on these sorts of things to grow stronger and stronger. But right now it seemed to be disdainful. Luonan tried to communicate with the human-faced arachnid. His analysis of the human-faced arachnid's information was far from complete. If he forced himself to understand it, there would be a lot of confusion and ambiguity. In the end, he could only confirm one thing. The human-faced arachnid had already undergone a certain level of evolution, so much so that its original food was no longer able to satisfy its needs. After all, there was no fish that relied on drinking water to survive. Perhaps the evolution of the human-faced arachnid was equivalent to a transition from a plankton to a fish? Should he congratulate her? Right when Luonan was racking his brains over the problem of the human-faced arachnid eating, the Dashang building was already in sight. Crag Burst had been waiting impatiently for a long time. Right now, he was standing on the 10th floor of the skyscraper, gazing into the distance. When he saw Ink flying over, he waved his hand excitedly from afar. "Hurry, I found an entrance here." Ink flapped its wings, searching for a place to land. How could Crag Burst wait any longer? He pointed to his shoulder and said, "Over here, I guarantee your safety." Luonan wasn't polite with him. He gave Ink an order and directly descended onto Crag Burst's shoulder. Immediately, the two of them began to exchange information. Everything below the 30th floor of the building, including the underground buildings, has a zigzag structure. The division between the inside and the outside is actually an isolation zone. Many of the buildings adjacent to the recycling stratum are built like this. Crag Burst had researched quite a bit of information while he was waiting. The isolation zone is a one-way passageway. Security is tight and all permissions are locked down. There are no normal channels to enter the business district of the building from the recycling stratum. It's the same no matter who it is. Outside of the isolation zone is the world of the gangs. They have dug through countless rat holes here. They have dug through not just the Dashang building, but the neighboring buildings as well. There are quite a few people living inside. Luonan listened to Crag Burst's chatter and matched this part of the situation with his own understanding of the information. He organized his words and said, "According to the information I've obtained, there is an underground fighting arena here in the Dashang building. People often come here to participate in gambling fights. Many of them are big and wealthy guests who throw money away. Jack is the ace host and referee of the fighting arena. He might also be one of the bosses behind the scenes. Underground fighting." Crag Burst's interest was immediately piqued when he heard the word fighting. "How come I've never heard of this before? I've been to practically all the fighting arenas in Xia City, public, private, legal, and illegal. It's probably because this place is reserved for minors." The periphery of the Dashang building's isolation zone was just as Crag Burst said. It was dirty, messy, and crisscrossed with dark tunnels. Luonan was able to obtain a lot of useful information from the mouths of the gang members. In addition to the panoramic image support of his mental senses, Luonan was able to move more smoothly and freely than the gangs entrenched here. Crag Burst originally had a belly full of anger because he was unsuccessful in his pursuit of Jack. He wanted to vent, but he never expected that Luonan would just cheat and open the map the moment he arrived. He only saw the shadows of the gang members chasing and weaving their way in and out, but he could only eat the dust from behind. The number of people he actually met was few and far between. It was hard for him to put his strength to use. He wasn't an idiot. Naturally, he could feel that Luonan wasn't just using the crow to scout. Instead, Luonan had a higher level of perception at play. "Good boy. There's something wrong with your ability. In terms of range, even Cat Eyes isn't this abnormal." Cat Eyes. Luonan was quite interested in this unruly woman who suddenly appeared in his own pyramid. Since the intensity of their advance wasn't that great, he just asked casually, What's the range of her long-range perception? Her all-encompassing perception ranges from 50 to 70 meters. Her psychic perception has a limit of 3,720 kilometers when she's in a good state. How much? Luonan nearly choked awake. Are you talking about kilometers or meters? It's kilometers without a doubt. Cragburst laughed out loud. It's inconceivable, right? But this is the terrifying aspect of long-range perception. As long as the feeling comes, there's no reasoning with you. Back in the day, Cat Eyes did one of the most amazing things. She used her extrasensory psychic perception to guide a 1,000,000-ton nuclear-penetrating warhead. It smashed directly into the underground lair of the mutant species in the wilderness. It was a standard hit to the soul. A bunch of arrogant big shots from the military all knelt before her. Luonan didn't know what to say for a time. He had been proud of the range of his soul-body's senses before, but he immediately encountered a standard that he could only look up to. But when he thought about it again, such an amazing person had actually entered his pyramid without a trace. She was more or less affected and suppressed by him. The feeling was quite subtle, Cragburst concluded. In a certain sense, Cat Eyes' ability should be the closest type to that of a psychic, but it isn't that mysterious. Aside from being unstable and being powerless against the Darksider species, she practically doesn't have any other flaws. So, by all means, don't offend her. Otherwise, she can find you in any corner of the city. She can take advantage of the time when you're in a dream. Crack. Cragburst made a motion of twisting Ink's neck and laughed loudly. He reached back to pinch Ink's head. You really need to be careful. I felt that you and her seemed to be innately incompatible that day. There's no way out? Chapter 108. The other side of the wall is the quarantine area. There's also an underground fighting arena. Cragburst couldn't see anything other than the white wall. But Luonan was different. His soul body had already passed through the wall. He had gone in and out of the building countless times. He was probably more clear about the layout inside than the designer. He combined the information he obtained earlier and explained to Cragburst. Originally, the quarantine area didn't allow for any other arrangements aside from surveillance and defense systems. But the management of the building made modifications in order to ensure the size of the area and the viewing effect. They occupied a portion of the surrounding area. This formed a fuzzy zone. The gangs of the recycling stratum can interact with the gamblers of the upper world. One side pays in money, and the other side pays in manpower. Jack is one of the true controllers of this fuzzy zone. This is his lair and his cornucopia. Cragburst didn't ask for more details. As a man who frequently entered and exited the underground fighting arena, he was even more clear than Luonan about the inside of the building. The management of the building should be the house of bankers. Only through this place could one transform incorporeal credit into tangible wealth in the current society of credit and authority. But he didn't care about this at all. He was only interested in how to capture Jack. Jack is in the fighting arena, right? How do we get in? Do we smash a passageway out? Cragburst was a bit eager to give it a try. This is a passageway. It's used for emergency evacuation. The design is that it can only be opened from the inside. Luonan let Ink flap its wings to wake up this bro whose brain was filled with violence. The problem was that it was completely ineffective. Roar roar. Let's be a bit more direct. Watch me. No. Wait a few more seconds. Luonan's voice had yet to fall when the white wall in front of him slid to one side. The inner layer of steel plates slid in the opposite direction. Only then did the ice-cold metal wall appear. But this wall also split open from the middle, revealing a dimly lit passageway. 3 layers of protection, especially the last layer that was 10 centimeters thick, made Cragburst speechless for a time. He didn't bring up using violence to open a passageway again. As for the passageway in front of them, it wasn't too long. One could see to the end with a glance. The door on the other side was half open. An even more intense light seeped in. There was also clamorous noise coming in. Clearly, the outside was a certain location of the underground fighting arena. Cragburst first looked at his feet. There was a person sitting down in the passageway. The person was already unconscious. He turned his head and looked around. Soon, he found that there was a password plate on top of the man's head. The corresponding screen showed that the password plate had been successfully opened. "Your mole." Cragburst quickly corrected this preposterous thought, but the following conjecture was even more preposterous to him. "Don't tell me that you controlled this guy through the wall and made him open the door?" Bullseye. Speaking of which, the effects of hypnosis combined with the human-faced arachnid's fishing technique were quite decent. Luonan just chuckled through the hexaear, maintaining a bit of a sense of mystery. He indicated to Cragburst to close this emergency passageway. This place was certainly connected to the control room. Though they couldn't hide it for too long, they could hide it for as long as they could. What the hell, this isn't just spirit attachment. It's some kind of ability enhancement. Actually, you can let the crow have some of your abilities, right? Do you have wizard blood? Or do you come from some secret order? Cragburst's thoughts were getting more and more outrageous. Luonan was really worried that the words, "his soul is in an out-of-body state," would come out of Cragburst's mouth. Luonan could only interrupt Cragburst once more. "Let's speed things up. It's very likely that Jack is only using this place as a transit point. The isolated area can't enter the business district of Deshang Building, but there's a direct passageway to the upper city district." Cragburst immediately shut his mouth. He simply cleaned up the scene and passed through the passageway. There was a circular hallway outside. The curvature was extremely obvious, making people feel that the space was indeed limited. The operator of this place had indeed made use of the space to the extreme. On the concave side of the wall there was a curved wall projection every now and then. On it there was an exciting scene in the arena. Sure enough, they're all kids. Cragburst's brows furrowed. He was a professional, so he felt vexed by the various scenes displayed on the screen. They have a certain amount of fighting techniques, but they're all competing in the dark and ruthless. They're trying to kill people. Many of the scenes of being knocked down on the screen had broken hands and feet, or they had been struck in a vital spot. Cragburst wouldn't even blink an eye at these things in the adult fighting world. But the two combatants on the screen didn't look to be older than 15, which was the same age as Luonan. They were a group of half-grown kids. They didn't hold back in the slightest. Did they really know what this represented? Many of them knew, judging by the ominous glint in their eyes. And the feeling brought about by this sort of warped thinking made people feel even more uncomfortable. The sound of footsteps came from both sides of the hallway at this time. Cragburst's intentions were to just go up and be done with it. But Luonan indicated for Cragburst to go to the other side, to a room with a thick curtain covering the door. Cragburst thought that this was the passageway to the fighting arena, but he discovered that it seemed to be a lounge after entering. The layout was very simple and crude. There were only wardrobes and benches. The passageway to the fighting arena was further inside. There was already a person in the lounge right now. He wore combat shorts, and his upper body was bare. He didn't wear shoes, and a towel was draped over his head. His face was drooping. It seemed that he was conserving his energy. He should be the next competitor to take the stage. He didn't have a coach or a friend by his side. He was all by himself. His entire body was cold and gloomy. He actually didn't react at all to Cragburst, the big guy who had suddenly barged in. Cragburst was a bit stupefied. Then he discovered that the room was actually very noisy. There was a display screen in the lounge as well, but it was a bit smaller than the one outside. The sound from the display screen was quite loud. It made people wonder what use this lounge could serve. The display screen just so happened to jump to a new scene at this time. "Look, Jack." Luonan reminded Cragburst to pay attention. The two's minds shook, but they soon discovered that this was just a video clip. Jack was wearing a referee uniform at the time. He wore a bow tie. His body was ramrod straight, and he had a sense of propriety. Aside from the unsightly scars on his face, he looked more like a noble steward than a referee. It was no wonder that his hosting and refereeing were so popular. This match isn't bad. Cragburst used a professional gaze to evaluate the tall and skinny one. His foundation is very solid. He has a sense of propriety in his attack. He's a very good control-type competitor. Hold on. There's something wrong with the editing. The editor had chosen this shot to be the scene of the tall and skinny kid slowing down, dodging, and circling around, which Cragburst had praised. It was completely different from the intense fighting scene before. Such camera language should be hinting at something. Luonan discovered that the competitor, who had his head lowered all this time, had raised his head to stare at the display screen. His thin and pale face was revealed beneath the towel. He was unexpectedly calm, and he continued to ignore Cragburst to the side. Chapter 109. The focus of the human-faced arachnid's attention was on the quiet and silent competitor. This person's age was about the same as Luonan's. His reserved and gloomy nature was about the same. However, the reason for the human-faced arachnid's attention was certainly not because of this. The feedback Luonan received was mostly anticipation and hunger. He was like a glutton, staring fixedly at a dish that was gradually cooking on the stove. He felt it was a pity to eat it, but he was impatient to not eat it. "This is the new food you've chosen?" Luonan had just been pondering over the changes in the human-faced arachnid's diet. Now he had a true reference. He couldn't help but spend a bit of energy to pay attention, but how could he understand it in a short period of time? And at this moment the camera turned. The strangely edited match ended, and there was even a post-match scene next. The two competitors stood in the center of the fighting stage, and Jack stood between them. It seemed that it was time to announce the victor. From the previous clips, the lanky kid's advantage was extremely clear, even though he had inexplicably less clip. He displayed an astonishing level of control. However, Jack wasn't in a hurry to announce the victor. He lowered his head to look at his watch. At this moment, the background music of the edited scene strangely stopped. This caused the sharp whistles and whistles from all four sides of the stands to grow louder, more clamorous, and more deafening. Finally, Jack made a move. He spread his arms, but he didn't act like a normal referee, grabbing the competitor's hand. Instead, he wrapped his arms around the shoulders of the two teenagers. It looked extremely intimate. But at this moment, the children's bodies went rigid. Jack wasn't in a hurry to announce the victor. Instead, he spoke like he was reciting a poem. His voice passed through a miniature microphone and spread throughout the entire arena. "As the referee, I must judge fairly. This is a conservative fight." The screams from the stands suddenly rose to a whole new level. A fight that has gone beyond time. The screams and cheers grew louder and louder. Some people even stood up and waved their arms towards the fighting stage. This spurred on even more people. Soon, no one was sitting in the entire fighting arena. Jack's expression didn't change as he spat out his final judgment. A fake fight! The people in the stands went completely crazy. The chaotic clamor had already converged into a simple yet heart-sinking sound. Kill, kill, kill! On the fighting stage, the faces of the two teenagers were deathly pale. They wanted to struggle, but they were firmly clamped down by Jack's iron arms. Jack said with a smile, "There are no losers, and there are no winners." Before he finished his sentence, Jack exerted force in both of his arms. The crisp sound of bones breaking was transmitted to the entire audience through the microphone on his body. The shoulder bones of the two youths instantly fell apart. A powerful force closed them up, crushing their sternum and spines. Then, the two youths who were no longer human were forcibly hugged in front of Jack's chest, causing them to hug each other. A pair of faces that were bleeding from all 7 orifices collided with each other, and then softened into 2 piles of dead flesh. Jack relaxed his arms, and the 2 corpses slid down. Without even looking, he crossed his arms and waved. Team ending, friendly match. Pass. F***CK. Without waiting for the next scene to change, the display suddenly caved in and cracked. Cragburst's fist had directly smashed it apart. Such an intense reaction thoroughly exposed Cragburst's position. But how could he care? He spat again, a bunch of dregs. The quiet contestant turned his face. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, but this emotion was extinguished before it could reach his face. In the end, he simply spat out 2 words. You guys? Cragburst stared at him with wide eyes. Kid, you want to participate in this bullshit fight? I'm the next one. Cragburst waved his hand roughly. Fuck the next one. Since I'm here, there will never be a next one. That way leads to the fighting arena, right? Cragburst was about to step out as he spoke. Not only was his sense of justice bursting, but the things that happened in this fighting arena made him, a fighting enthusiast, feel disgusted. Luonan helplessly called for Cragburst to stop when he saw that Cragburst was about to smash the fighting arena to pieces. This was already completely out of line with their original intentions, okay? I'm willing to bet that as soon as you enter the arena, Jack will immediately disappear without a trace. Even if you knock over everyone in the arena, what's the point of letting this murderer escape? That's the problem with your scouting. Why haven't you found that black-skinned rat yet? Cragburst made the same mistake as Luonan in his excitement. He forgot that he was communicating through the psychic wave network and directly spoke. The quiet competitor saw that Cragburst was talking to the air. His eyes streaked across the air and didn't see anything else. In the end, his eyes stopped on the crow on Cragburst's shoulder. He opened his mouth, a little hesitant, but finally said, Sir, are you talking to the crows? Cragburst stared blankly for a moment. He turned his head to look and said, baffled, yeah. Cragburst regretted it as soon as the words left his mouth. Such a reply was too stupid. But at that moment the quiet contestant, who had been expressionless all this while, actually smiled. So it's Mr. Crow. Can I talk to him too? A slightly shaky smile and surprisingly childish words blossomed in the narrow lounge. It was also at this time that Cragburst and Luonan truly and clearly realized that this fighter, who was about to walk onto the fighting stage and receive fatal adjudication, was truly just a half-grown child. At the same time, the deathly still eyes of the 15 or 16-year-old boy in front of him flashed slightly. His entire body's life force and spiritual energy rippled out from his long and narrow eyes. Cragburst didn't know what to say when faced with such a face. In the end, he could only shrug his shoulders. Fine. If he's willing. Borrowing the force of Cragburst's shrug, ink flew and jumped, landing directly on the arm of the quiet contestant. Of course, this was under Luonan's indication. The quiet contestant was delighted by Ink's intelligence. Then he slightly straightened up and bowed very solemnly toward Ink. My name is Ruewan. They call me Marauder, but I'm nothing more than a crow. This is my 100th match, and it's also my last match. I hope that Mr. Crow can give me his blessings. This time, there were a few more words. Luonan discovered that the quiet contestant was called Ruewan, right? His voice was quite special. It seemed that his voice hadn't gone through puberty yet. There was a bit of sharpness within the hoarseness, and there was a natural resonance of breath. It was very unique. It made people feel that, if he were to sing, he would be quite good. That, Cragburst didn't quite understand. He tried to interrupt but was stopped by Luonan. This sort of feeling was far too familiar. The current Ruewan was the same as Luonan many times. He was completely trapped in his own circle, forming his own logic. There was no need to forcefully break it. Perhaps this was the chance for him to relax the most. It was the moment he treasured the most. And at this time, the human-faced arachnid began to stir. Within the eyes of this newly promoted glutton, there was a bright seed rising from the dark and desolate abyss. Even though the seed was bound and surrounded by the filthy and turbid streams, it was pure and untainted. It was pure and transparent. Chapter 110. Luonan's senses were synchronized with the human-faced arachnids. The human-faced arachnid was paying intense attention to Luonan. Such a strong stimulation also made some of the muddled information clear. Sure enough, the human-faced arachnid no longer treated the turbid flow of emotions as food after leaping from a plankton to a fish. What it was truly interested in right now was the spiritual seed that undulated up and down within the turbid flow. In reality, it was something that lived within the turbid flow of emotions, yet it was completely different from the turbid flow. It was something that possessed more vitality. It wasn't easy to form such a spiritual seed. One must have the mental cultivation to overcome filthy emotions and desires, as well as a basic positive attitude in order to finally take shape. Just like Ruewan, he had only been in embryonic form a long time ago. It wasn't until he spoke to Mr. Crow that he broke free from his deathly still and cold state of mind. Only then did this spiritual seed finally sublimate and leap to a new level. Cragburst actually had a similar spiritual seed as well, but it was hidden deep within his powerful magma-like life force. It wasn't as pure and transparent as Ruewan's. From the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, the spiritual seed was an incomparable delicacy. Swallowing the spiritual seed was both a form of eating and evolution. Its evolution method was very lethal. It basically used the vitality and spirituality of others as nourishment. Its path of evolution was built on the foundation of destroying the hopes of others. Without a doubt, the human-faced arachnid was an existence that was evil to the extreme. Even if Luonan relied on its strength to a large degree, he would not deny this point. Although he did not deny it, it did not mean that he would allow it. Otherwise, what was the difference between it and the human-faced arachnid? Luonan's complete control over the human-faced arachnid was displayed without restraint. No matter how intense the human-faced arachnid's desire to eat was, the heavily chained crow shook, and it had to be well behaved. At this moment, someone walked in from the passageway that led to the fighting arena. The moment the door opened, the noise from the fighting arena almost overwhelmed the small resting room. Fortunately, it was quickly isolated again. That person said loudly, "Ruewan, get ready to go on stage. The incomparable 100th match." Who are you?" "Your grandfather." Cragburst revealed an evil grin towards that person. Before that person could cry out in shock, Cragburst slapped him unconscious to the ground. Ruewan turned a blind eye to this. He was already completely immersed in his own world. He stood up and gently swung his arms up and down. "Well, Mr. Crow, here comes my last battle. You won't be stingy with your blessings, right?" Swish. Perhaps it was because Ink was quite satisfied from being swayed, but Ink had already opened its mouth before Luonan could speak. Its hoarse voice was unpleasant to hear, but it made Ruewan smile once more. He crossed his arms and walked over to Cragburst's side. He returned the ink. "Thank you, sir. You and Mr. Crow's arrival is my fortune." "Ahem, nothing." With Cragburst's straightforward temperament, he really wasn't suited to dealing with a reserved and autistic person like Ruewan. The logic of both sides was not on the same line. Luckily, Luonan extended a helping hand at this time. He gave Cragburst some advice, allowing Cragburst to ask for information, even though his words were very clumsy. "You just said 100 matches. Is there any special meaning to it? After 100 matches, I can choose to walk the path of judgment and leave the arena." It's all tricks, and they've been used too much. Cragburst had seen similar situations far too many times in other underground arenas. Are there challenges on the road of adjudication? Of course. Who made it out in the past? Since the establishment of the fighting arena, The ones closest to 100 victories have been me and my brother. Oh right. I thank you for your praise before on behalf of him. Luonan and Cragburst thought of the skinny and tall youth who died under Jack's iron arm at the same time. Cragburst smashed his fist against his palm. Isn't the truth quite clear? What bullshit road of adjudication. This fighting arena never thought of letting you guys leave alive. The truth was indeed quite clear. This fighting arena was jointly established by a group of rich people and gangs of the recycling stratum. Contestants like Rue-1 were mostly poor orphans of the recycling stratum. They were controlled by gangs and underwent harsh training to fight each other to the death for the amusement of the rich. Cragburst hoped that Rue-1 could clarify the truth. Leave? That's just a gimmick. A gimmick, nothing more. But Rue-1 didn't respond. She just tore off the towel on top of her head, revealing her refreshing jet-black short hair. The contours of her face were actually quite delicate and pretty. Her delicate and pretty appearance was a bit out of place in this cruel beating arena. Cragburst was still persuading her. Hey, just join us. I'll take you to kill our way out. Rue-1 walked forward in silence. Cragburst extended his hand in an attempt to grab her, but Rue-1 didn't even turn her head. Only a cold and clear voice transmitted over. I'm going to kill our way out. I'm going to do it the way my brother and I did. Cragburst froze and stopped. Rue-1 pushed open the soundproof door and walked out with large strides. DJ's resounding voice transmitted over. This is an unprecedented 100-victory battle. Look, our wing of death, the undefeated plunderer Rue-1. Cheers could be heard from the arena. Amidst the chaotic and distorted roars, there was a strange voice mixed with it. Male and female monsters. Flat-chested witches. Take it off completely. Verify her identity. Cragburst couldn't catch his breath properly. He choked and nearly caused ink to go askew. Luonan's soul body nearly lost its grip on the chain and let the human-faced arachnid charge out. A woman? I couldn't tell at all. Cragburst was stupefied in place. Who would have thought? Rue-1's upper body was bared from start to finish. Her attitude was natural, and she didn't have any obvious secondary sexual characteristics. Even if she did, it would be submerged under the lines of her thin and hard muscles. Luonan was a bit embarrassed as well, but this awkward thought was forcibly severed when Rue-1 stepped onto the fighting stage and exposed her thin body to the gazes of thousands of people. Cragburst held open the soundproof door that was about to close, so that the clamor of the fighting arena could be heard in an unending stream. Oh, I'll grant you the path to leave. Bye. Let's start the auction today. I want to taste the taste of the flat-chested witch. Cheers, clamor, and whistles rang out without end. Several hundred rich and powerful people, who were likely to make a name for themselves in various fields, used the body and life of this little girl to obtain stimulation that couldn't be obtained on the level of normal society. And Rue-1? The turbid flow of filth surged up from all directions. But that pure spiritual seed remained untainted by even a speck of dust. This girl, whose gender was hard to distinguish, had already been completely shielded from the influence of the filth of the outside world. But no matter what, why was such a girl placed in such a filthy place? Cragburst didn't make a sound as he walked forward with large strides. Luonan was a bit unable to restrain himself. He actually didn't stop Cragburst when he walked forward. Cragburst walked out of the passageway. It was reasonable to say that his large and unfamiliar face was the type that would attract a lot of attention. But right now, the vast majority of the people in the fighting arena had their attention focused on the fighting stage. They didn't notice Cragburst at all. But Rue-1, who was on the fighting stage, turned her head without any warning. Her cold and clear gaze made Cragburst halt once more. He wanted to advance, but he couldn't. Chapter 111. Rue-1 quickly straightened her body and calmly stood in the center of the boxing ring. Her head was slightly drooped, allowing the rich and powerful people in the stands to wantonly size her up and evaluate her body. They constantly raised the stakes in the gambling house, causing the atmosphere to heat up even more. Cragburst's mouth didn't stop cursing the moment she walked through the tunnel. He turned his head to look at the spectator stands in all four directions. He just wanted to find someone he didn't like and give them a fierce beating. The problem was, there wasn't a single person in the entire arena that he didn't want to beat up. Has Jack been found yet? Cragburst paid special attention to the referee of this match. Unfortunately, it wasn't Jack. This made him even more vexed. Luonan didn't respond. Right now his mental senses had already covered the entire fighting arena. With this as the center, it covered a vast area with a radius of over 500 meters. It was equal to encompassing the greater half of the Dashang building within it. Even though the sensing range was slightly reduced due to the differences in the building materials and the interference of the radio waves, and the precision was still on the millimeter level, it was not a reason why Jack could not be captured. The modified human seemed to have completely evaporated. At this time, Rui Wen's opponent was already on stage. Ignoring the string of meaningless titles, it was a stout and robust man who looked no less than 2 or 3 times bigger than Rui Wen. He didn't look like a 15 or 16-year-old child at all. However, the spectators in the stands were already used to it. They cheered and egged the contestant on as well. "Dope boy. Come on, powder keg, it's time to explode. They're going to do it on stage. They're so compatible." Luonan's attention was drawn back. He was a complete layman in the field of fighting. He only had a vague concept of heavyweight and the like. He couldn't help but worry for Rui Wen when he saw the eye-catching contrast of body shapes in the boxing ring. Cragburst was quite disdainful of the fat man, a fellow who uses drugs to stimulate his maturation. If he continues like this, he won't even need to go on stage. His own weight will crush his bones. But it had to be said that this sort of thing like drug stimulation was very common in the underground fighting arenas. Rui Wen might have also taken some sort of drug to suppress the development of her secondary sexual characteristic. Otherwise, as a girl with an innately deficient physique, it would have been very difficult for her to obtain 100 victories. When all was said and done, Cragburst and Luonan had no idea what was going on. In the end, Cragburst could only comfort him. "I'm here. Even if something unexpected happens, I can save him." Ink spread its wings and slapped Cragburst's face. This fellow didn't know how to talk. "Do we need you to save them?" The crux of the problem was that Rui Wen's current mental state and state were inconceivably clear and bright. But once she was destroyed by an external force, the damage to her mind would be extremely frightening. It would be much more troublesome than a pure physical injury. Luonan had just analyzed this point from the human-faced arachnid, but he was unable to explain it to Cragburst. He felt stifled to the extreme. The exchange between the two was meaningless, but the development of the fight on the boxing stage caught everyone off guard. After a full 20 minutes of prelude, atmosphere, and bets, the battle began. Faced with an opponent who was at least twice as heavy as her, Rui Wen didn't retreat, but instead advanced. She rushed in from the front, and before Gunpowder Barrel's thick arms could close in, she had already broken his tibia with a single kick. Just as Gunpowder Barrel's fingers touched Rui Wen's shoulder, he lost his balance and fell to the ground in pain. Rui Wen easily broke away from his grasp, and took the opportunity to kick him in the head, sending him into an unconscious state. The battle ended just like that. The originally heaven-flipping scene turned cold and silent in an instant. The vast majority of people, including the wealthy guests who won their bets, were unable to accept such a simple and laughable ending. They sunk into an awkward silence. Originally, the wagered fight was just a pastime. What they truly wanted to see was the cruel and bloody scene of fists hitting flesh. Cragburst's wild laughter and his celebratory action of raising his arms and brandishing his fists were exceptionally eye-catching under this bizarre atmosphere. Even the cameras that covered the entire arena gave him a close-up. Luonan wanted ink to smack Cragburst's head. If this wasn't exposure, then what was? On the boxing stage, the referee was stupefied for a few seconds before going forward to examine the injury. This was just a formality. His true intention was to use this opportunity to get in contact with the person in charge and figure out what to do next. However, the big boss of the fighting arena, Jack, was unable to be contacted from beginning to end. In the end, it was the supervisor who spoke up and let the referee smooth things over first. The referee helplessly got up and grabbed Rui Wen's hand, preparing to announce the victor. But Rui Wen pushed his hand away. Then she borrowed the help of the referee's miniature microphone to say a few simple words. "I choose the road of adjudication." It was as if a bomb had been forcefully shoved into the oppressive and awkward atmosphere of the fighting arena with these words. First came the low clamor of several hundred people. Then came the sounds of cheering, laughing, cursing, and whistling. They flooded the entire fighting arena. The atmosphere exploded in an instant, wishing it could flip over the entire Dashang building. Challenger! Traitor! The flat-chested witch's counterattack. Stupid woman! Has your brain turned into muscle? Go die! Just tear her to shreds. No. Break her 4 limbs. Knock out her teeth. I want it! I want it! The several hundred rich and powerful spectators had personally drawn up the rules. They had designed a seemingly magnanimous path of escape. But when this rule was finally challenged, not many people could remain calm. The so-called magnanimity was just a symbolic footnote they made for their lofty status. Touching it was an offense. So in the end, all the emotions converged together to transform into a uniform howl. Adjudication! 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 The referee also returned to his senses from the unexpected change. He actually felt that he had been saved. A laughable battle that had been doused in cold water had suddenly turned into a large bomb that ignited everyone's emotions. Good. At this time, the projectors all over the fighting arena had already taken advantage of the opportunity to broadcast information related to the road of adjudication. Various images flashed in succession, listing the 3 deathly steps of King of Fists, Beast King Battle, and Adjudication Battle. The first 2 stages, as their names implied, were fights with true adult fighters and wild and untamed beasts. Only then was it the 3rd stage. The projector timely displayed the image of a calm and callous white man wearing a referee uniform. Adjudicator, Jack. The gang leader here, the gold medal host, the referee, and the murderer who had killed Rui Wen's brother, was precisely the boss of the final stage. Each projector also timely displayed the scene of many contestants, including Rui Wen's brother, dying at the hands of this callous referee. The fighting arena emitted a sharp whistling sound with each life disappearing until it finally stopped at the scene of Jack waving his hands and denying everything. The entire fighting arena was about to boil over. Chapter 112. Luonan's sole body stood towering amidst this wanton and rushing torrent of emotions. Originally, he should have been angry, but from his unique perspective, he saw Rui Wen, who continued to stand silently on the fighting stage after her words. He also saw her spiritual seed that was submerged in the turbid flow, yet remained untainted from beginning to end by a speck of dust. A wondrous calm arrived. Just like this, Luonan looked down from high above, coldly looking down at the several hundred warped faces. His mental senses were like a large net that didn't let anything through. It covered every nook and cranny within a 500-meter radius. At the same time, it included the emotional movements of every single person. The vast majority of people were fanatical, but there were some people who were a bit special. For example, this person was a bit impatient. Luonan's attention naturally shifted. This was a certain VIP room in the upper part of the fighting arena. A man dressed in a suit and leather shoes was pacing endlessly in the room, shouting, "Jack! Jack! Damn it! I know you heard me. The high-priority communicator crackled with static extremely clearly. A voice transmitted back approximately 2 seconds later. What's up? Found it. Luo Nan instantly focused his attention, increasing his precision in all aspects. He felt that it wasn't enough, so he simply shifted his soul body over. He was in the VIP room, sticking to the back of the contact's neck to receive the message from the communicator. The contact was excited to finally get in touch with that damn Jack. He never would have thought that there was a spirit behind him that was receiving the message at the same time as him. In fact, the information Luo Nan received far exceeded that of the contact. After increasing his precision, Luo Nan was able to see not only the tangible substance, but he was also able to capture the interweaving electrical waves in the air. It was impossible for Luo Nan to know the information transmitted by the electrical waves due to his lack of the ability to transform and analyze. However, he was able to refer to the continuous interweaving and spreading fluctuations within the communicator to determine the approximate direction. This was his first attempt, but it wasn't easy to realize a tracking in the information society where countless electrical waves interweaved and covered. Fortunately, the contact and Jack continued to communicate. The contact explained to Jack in as much detail as he could. During this time, the buzzing noise of interference continued to ring. The quality of the call was extremely bad. In the end, the contact didn't even know what he said. Damn it, Jack. Where the hell are you? On the road to heaven. Jack sounded like he was doing some sort of exercise. His voice was a bit breathless. Now isn't the time for jokes. You must come back. Immediately. I was just about to touch heaven, to hell with heaven. Rue-Wan wants to charge through the path of adjudication. It was Rue-Wan. Didn't you say that any news related to this woman must be reported to you immediately? There was a sudden silence on the other side. After a full 5 seconds, Jack finally replied, Who was in the first 2 stages? The contact was overjoyed to see that Jack finally understood the seriousness of the matter. He quickly continued to report the latest situation. The first obstacle is Durong, our chief combat coach. This pass is meaningless. Next stage. But, oh my god! The tycoons in the fighting arena all screamed like they'd gone mad. This was because Rue-Wan had paid the price of bruising her wrist just a second ago. She'd made another terrifying close-quarters assault. Her knee had fiercely smashed into Rongda's crotch. This robust man's physique wasn't inferior to Cragburst's as he bent over in pain. Her elbow smashed into his throat, smashing his entire Adam's apple into mush. The fractured bones were displaced, and she cut open his carotid artery. Asphyxiation and arterial bleeding caused this strong man to fall to the ground, twitching as he quickly walked towards death. Rue-Wan gazed at the dying man on the ground and said softly, For the 70% eliminated. The contact was already stupefied from watching. He couldn't bear this kind of loss any longer. Rongda was once the champion of the Underground Fighting Alliance. She must have concealed her strength. What the hell is going on here? Who taught her? Damn it, damn it, damn it. Jack already understood everything from the contact's reaction. He issued orders with a hoarse voice, Raise the protective walls on all fronts right now. Isolate the fighting arena. Tell that group of trash that we need a certain amount of time to prepare for the Beast King battle. Prepare for what? You go contact Mr. Ma. Tell him that the high-quality life and death duel he's been dreaming of has arrived. We'll send out the 100 victory which Rue-Wan. He only needs to bring his family's little darling over. I'll give him 10 minutes of time. Oh, Mr. Ma's collection. Jack, you're really too evil. The contact came to a sudden realization. He greatly praised Jack's way of thinking. He immediately hung up and hastily went to find someone. Rue-Wan. Forget it. I'll just go with her cheap older brother. Jack removed his wristband and casually tossed it to the side. Don't anyone disturb me again. He was suddenly startled before his voice fell. He slowly raised his head. His undamaged right eye and the mechanical electronic eye focused at the same time. They stared at the empty space in front of them. He finally found it. Luonan's soul body appeared in this room. He also noticed Jack's reaction, but right now he was even more shocked at Jack's current location. Jack was still inside the Deshang building, but he was on the top floor of the building, the 141st floor. This landmark building of the River Wu district had a height of around 600 meters. The 141st floor was over 550 meters in height. It just so happened to exceed the range of Luonan's all-encompassing perception. Originally Luonan didn't believe that Jack would leave his usual lair and enter the privileged society that was absolutely unfriendly to gangsters like them. But the facts proved that his judgment was wrong. Not only did Jack enter, but he also arrived at the top floor of the Deshang building, which required extremely high credit privileges. He even had an independent training room here. At this moment, Jack was sitting in the middle of a pitch-black device whose purpose could not be seen. His body was connected to many wires, and powerful electric currents were piercing his body at every moment. Some of them even pulled out beautiful blue electric currents in the air. Is it charging the altered human right now? Jack's eyes were constantly changing focus. The end of the air was a wall. But before the wall, there was a reaction that made him vigilant. It appeared without end. A special scanner was installed in his body. The naked eye and the electronic eye received light waves of all frequencies and compared them with the surrounding environment. The data was calculated and processed to form an image. In the end, what appeared on his optic nervous system was an image that was as fuzzy as a shadow. He paused for a moment before speaking in a hoarse voice. Ability user? Soul configuration? Luonan was truly shocked. The electromagnetic gun attack on the recycling stratum really wasn't a coincidence. This Jack seemed to have some sort of method that could capture the existence of a soul body. His soul body floated a few times in the room. He discovered that although Jack's gaze was a bit sluggish, it was always able to rapidly change. This was a situation that had never happened before. Chapter 113. In the end, Jack was the first to break the silence. He stared at the empty space and said in a low voice, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know which force you belong to, but I can confirm that there was no enmity between us before today. I admire your ability, and I don't want to be your enemy. If you're unhappy with today's conflict, I'm willing to make amends. Whatever you want, I will do my best to satisfy you within my capabilities." The only response he got was the buzzing sound of the electric current. Jack paused for a moment before continuing, "Your soul configuration has yet to reach the level where your mind can interfere with matter. My nervous system has been modified, and your influence on me is negligible. Yes, there's also that big guy. He's a very headache-inducing opponent. Perhaps he's currently rushing over, but inside the Deshang building, I'll make his pace slow like a turtle. If we can't come to an agreement, we'll just have to drag it out, maybe until tomorrow morning?" Luonan still did not respond. There was no way to respond even if he wanted to. Jack was right about one thing. At present, he only had two means of communication. One was the psychic wave network, and the other was the local network of the format pyramid. Neither of them were useful to Jack. It was as if Jack's consciousness was hidden under a thick layer of ice water. He could reach it, but he had used up too much of his strength halfway through. It was almost nothing. Luonan didn't know how Jack did it. He simply blocked out Jack's voice and scanned the entire room in an attempt to discover more information. Of course, the most eye-catching thing in this training room was the pitch-black machine outside of Jack's body. With Luonan's meager knowledge of machinery, it was very hard for him to understand the ultimate purpose of the machine. And from the surface, it looked like the machine was just an unending stream of electricity being poured into Jack's body. Luonan paid attention to the voltage indicator. Any normal person would have turned into charcoal by now, but Jack seemed to be enjoying it. It could be seen that the electric current instilled by the black machine had truly cut into every part of Jack's body. Jack's muscles were twitching and trembling every second, but within this twitching and trembling, there was clearly a relatively stable rhythm. This meant that Jack had retained some control over his body. What did he just say? On the way to heaven, it was clear that such an electric infusion was beneficial to Jack. Oh, in that case, Jack continued to chatter endlessly while Luonan was gathering information. I get it. You can't open your mouth, right? The research on soul configuration on Earth is still very backward, or are you just a talented person who got lucky? Very well, then. I can probably guess what you are more interested in. Intelligence, information, all kinds of knowledge that can broaden your horizons. For example, right now, I can tell you that you can use the special waveband of your soul configuration to communicate with me. This is because my body has been implanted with the corresponding transceiver. Even if I haven't used it for 2 to 3 years, it shouldn't be damaged. We can try it now. You just need to focus your mind. You have the talent to form a soul configuration, so it should be easy for you to do this. The void was silent for about 5 seconds. Then Jack smiled. The psychic waves from the outside world were converted into recognizable information through the transceiver in his body, ringing in his ears. I can now believe that you are indeed not from the military. If the military possessed a similar transformation project, then they wouldn't be in such a difficult situation when facing the Darksider life forms. Jack maintained his smile, making the scar on his face look less sinister. Of course, there is a certain difference between soul configuration and Darksider life forms. We can talk about it in detail later. You really do know a lot. Luonan expressed his admiration for Jack's ability to bring up new information at any moment. That's why I'm a very good information peddler. Jack continued to speak with fervor and assurance. What do we talk about? Oh right. Let's talk about why we became enemies. I think you will certainly be interested in that pretty boy Yen Yongbua. Now that you mention it, I find that I know too much. Luonan sneered. Yes, this fellow buried countless hooks in his words. What earth, soul configuration, psychic wave transceiver. But in reality, there was practically no valuable information that he revealed. So a second later, Luonan directly said, Let's talk about that metal beetle. The smile on Jack's lips widened. Friend, you must be quite young. You must know that communication shouldn't be done in a fit of pique. You should think of ways to embarrass the other party. I know that you must be more interested in Yen Yongbua. Otherwise, you wouldn't have followed him. Let me think. What is his explosive point? For example, Quantum Corporation? Archetype format? The world's first burner? Or perhaps, Deep Blue World? You must be a master storyteller. Luonan used psychic waves to send a mocking message, but he had no choice but to admit that the titles that Jack mentioned had nearly caused his curiosity to explode. It was as if he had bumped into a moving database of information. This fellow, Jack, was absolutely not a simple gang leader. His experiences, knowledge, and even the level of contact he had had with him far exceeded Luonan's previous estimations. However, let's just leave it at that for now. Jack's smile continued to persist, but a short second later, astonishment and explosive rage tore apart this layer of mask, arriving together with the darkness that enveloped the room. A power outage. The low humming of the pitch-black machine gradually came to a stop. The power outage protection was done quite well. The muscles on Jack's body only twitched a bit before returning to normal. But his mood couldn't return. Damn it! What did you do? Jack roared in the darkness. He did his best to shake his arms, but this didn't give him a sliver of electricity. It's as you can see. The power is out. Luonan used the method that Jack taught him to maintain communication. Jack's choice of the top floor of the Deshang building as a hiding place was indeed an unimaginably brilliant move. However, as a business district with people coming and going, there were uncontrollable factors. To put it more bluntly, there were far too many human factors. Hypnosis combined with the human-faced arachnid's fishing technique was truly too useful. Luonan just spent a bit of time while Jack chattered on endlessly. He chose a property manager and cut off the power supply to this floor. During this time, he discovered that Jack's training room used a dedicated power supply line. But this point was meaningless in front of the manager of the building. Reality proved that no matter what function the machine Jack used, it could only be a pile of scrap metal once the power supply was cut off. I want to obtain information. You want to obtain time. The meaning of communication lies in this. But no one can obtain it. So what? It seemed that the last remnant images of his peers in the boxing ring still remained before Luonan's eyes. He didn't care whether or not Jack could see them. His soul body made the same negative action of crossing its arms. Chapter 114. As the last bit of electric current disappeared in the darkness, Jack's intense movements also stopped. He sat in the middle of the machine, and the wires on his body broke off one after another. In the end, all that was left was a violent gasp. The interruption of the power supply seemed to have placed an unexpected burden on Jack. However, his bionic eyes didn't dim because of the power cut. On the contrary, they became more and more dazzling as his emotions fluctuated. While panting, Jack emphasized again, "You arrogant bastard! Damn it! Do you know what you've done? I did something that made you very unhappy, and I plan to continue doing it." This was what Luonan said, and this was what he did. The human-faced arachnid, who had just completed its mission, had already passed through the wall and returned to Luonan's side. Under Luonan's guidance, the human-faced arachnid threw itself at Jack. Luonan could now confirm that Jack's previous words weren't a lie. There really was a certain difference between soul bodies and darksider life forms. Jack was clearly able to lock onto the soul body, but he was completely unaware of the arrival of the human-faced arachnid. This was despite the fact that half of the human-faced arachnid's body was about to merge into his body. But on the other hand, the human-faced arachnid couldn't seem to find a place to eat Jack. Even though Jack was enraged to the point of madness, his special soul defense was still working. Right now, the human-faced arachnid was at best a probing imaging device. Even if it could clearly probe the inner workings of Jack's brain, it wouldn't be able to create any interference. It also lacked interest. The human-faced arachnid really had no interest in Jack at all. It wasn't because the low-level turbid flow of emotions was no longer part of its menu. It was because this thing simply couldn't be eaten. It was like an excellent painter could paint a flower so lifelike that it would attract bees and butterflies, but he would never be able to pick the honey. This was the difference between a real object and a painting, the difference between reality and illusion. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, Jack's emotions were a vivid yet false picture. It could be seen that the structure and operation of Jack's brain, which had been partially modified, were shockingly concise and efficient. What kind of stimulation would trigger which cluster of neurons, what kind of neurotransmitters would be produced, and what kind of conduction between neurons would be triggered, forming a continuous running assembly line. At first glance, this was no different from a normal person's mental model. But as a matter of fact, most of the emotions and psychological activities of human beings had complicated operating mechanisms. The coordinated activation of various brain regions was far from something that could be replaced by an ideal assembly line. If one were to delve deeper into this, they would discover that Jack's seemingly efficient and concise operation mode was more of an encoding method. The human-faced arachnid's probing was extraordinarily deep. The human-faced arachnid's tentacles had already spread to every nook and cranny of Jack's body without his knowledge. Because of this, it discovered a region that had been precisely modified in the depths of Jack's brain, probably at the location of the central mass that connected the left and right thalamus. There was an even smaller core embedded within it. Almost all of Jack's nerve activities would be transmitted through the channels that had been set up in advance to exchange information with the nucleus. This nucleus would transmit the corresponding stimulation to the various nerve centers and then give feedback. Without a doubt, this core played the role of a system integration. All kinds of codes were substituted into the formula to form the answer, and then transmitted out. This was originally a natural function of the brain, but it had been replaced by the mechanical reaction of the nucleus. This crucial step was the distinction between real and fake. Were all altered humans like this? Luonan didn't have too much confidence in his own observations. He was still guessing at the role of the nucleus. However, there was a situation that firmly grabbed his attention. There was a thin thread coiled around this extremely secretive nucleus body. No, it was the metal beetle. That's right, this was the metal beetle that Yin Yonghua had tossed out of the car. Luonan was incomparably certain because there was a small half of the beetle shape preserved at the end of the thin thread. He couldn't help but speculate that the metal beetle would completely disappear after a period of time. It would transform into the form of a thin thread. What were the conditions for the transformation? Luonan could more or less understand just by looking at the dark machine that had already stopped operating. It was also this coiled thread that gave Luonan an extremely familiar feeling. He used the human-faced arachnid as a medium to unleash his soul clairvoyance. He discovered that the thread clearly flickered with flickering electricity, and when he increased the precision of his senses a step further, he was certain that the thread had already split into countless even finer branches. Many of them had already exceeded the range of precision of his senses. Luonan could only see that some of these branches had pierced into the interior of the nucleus. Some of them had even seeped into the nerves and blood vessels. They had probably already spread throughout the entire brain, forming a tree-shaped structure with the nucleus as the center. This is the external neuron? What the fuck are you doing now? Luonan's unbridled probing methods had probably set off some sort of alarm device. Jack was horrified and startled. His blood-red robotic eyes locked rigidly onto the location of Luonan's soul body. But compared to these things on the surface, the changes that had occurred within Jack's brain were what truly shook Luonan's mind. It was that thin thread that had split into countless branches. The thin thread pierced into various parts of Jack's brain. It instantly trembled with tightly woven electrical fire. The electrical fire didn't occur on the plane of reality. At least, it wasn't limited to just that. This was because the human-faced arachnid that was deep within felt a burning sensation that was enough to endanger its existence at this very moment. It didn't need Luonan's command to frantically retreat outwards. Jack's mood template of rage had certainly been adjusted to the highest level. His entire body stood up, and it was also at this moment that his body clearly emitted a dark and deep glow of flames. The glow of flames came from the inside out, forcibly blasting the human-faced arachnid out of Jack's body. Moreover, the human-faced arachnid's momentum didn't decrease in the slightest as it pounced towards Luonan's location. The human-faced arachnid let out a pained howl. The powerful attack on the mental plane instantly swept through the many floors of the Deshang building. It was unknown how many people were innocently affected in this instant. Luonan was already unable to care about these things. The instant the glow of flames erupted, he exhausted all of the strength of his soul to leap through the air. Luonan was transported in a dizzying manner, but the distance he flew was far below Luonan's estimations. He just flew out of the room. The entire distance didn't exceed 20 meters. An incorporeal magnetic field formed around Jack's body when the glow of flames erupted. It warped the mental plane and even the space of reality. It was as if Luonan's soul body had fallen into a bottomless deep sea. An astonishing pressure came from all directions. This feeling was far too familiar. On the warship a few days ago, the burning wraith that He Wayne had beheaded had suffered a similar technique. It had been locked onto, controlled, and then turned into ashes. Luo Nan's mind truly trembled as if electricity had passed through it. Chapter 115. You Can't Escape. Jack's hoarse voice was like the low cry of a deep-sea monster. It penetrated through the walls, shaking Luo Nan's soul body to the point of being slightly shaken. Was this guy really a burner? Based on the information that Luo Nan knew, burners were not like this. At the very least, the burners under Yen Hong's archetype formatting theory were not like this. Otherwise, there would be no need for the deep blue platform or the exoskeleton armor. He could just modify his entire body. However, what Jack had displayed was indeed the power of the format of fire. In the next second, the thick and heavy walls of the training room rumbled and violently deformed. A hole had been blasted open in the center, and cracks spread out like a spider web. Jack's training room was located in the middle of the 141st floor. It was a space sealed off by 4 thick and heavy soundproof walls. Only one side had an open door. The direction Luo Nan chose to jump in was the opposite of the main door. He stretched out the normal path of pursuit to the greatest extent. However, Jack's choice was completely different from a normal person's. Using Jack as a reference, Luo Nan was actually really affected by the human mindset. He should have gone up or down just now. There was a floor separating them. Even if there was interference from the magnetic field, the situation would be completely different. Luo Nan didn't have the mind to reflect on his actions. He still tried to pull away, but the pressure his soul body endured continued to rise, making it difficult for him to move forward. Hell, even the military's burners, with the support of their exoskeleton armor, didn't have this kind of power. The wall exploded with a bang following another heavy strike. Jack walked out with large strides. His naked eye and bionic eye locked firmly onto Luo Nan's position. At this moment, the scene of flames soaring around his body had already disappeared, but the magnetic field that was like the deep sea was even more powerful. Through soul observation, he could confirm that Jack's entire body was deeply integrated with the deep sea EM field. The energy circulating within his body endlessly increased the effectiveness of the magnetic field, and the exertion of strength with every movement could bring about an intense change in the magnetic field. This was undoubtedly a terrible experience for Luo Nan. Jack stared at the direction where the soul was. His rage seemed to have been controlled, and his voice became hoarse and deep. "Young man, do you know how great of a price I paid in order to obtain the Deep Sea Type 4 Dynamo Core? Do you know how much your naughty behavior will cost me?" Dynamo Core? Is that the official name for the external neuron? Also, does this model also represent the corresponding ability? Just like the deep sea EM field that Jack was radiating, Luo Nan unconsciously pondered over this word, and Jack didn't immediately attack him. Instead, he sized up the surroundings with a somewhat uncertain appearance. Ability users nowadays are really amazing. I actually saw a young man who can raise a Darksider life form. Moreover, that breed seems to be quite interesting. Jack should be probing. Though he had injured the human-faced arachnid, he was still unable to capture its whereabouts. Luo Nan responded with silence. His attitude made Jack laugh coldly. "All right, I'll add this incident to my database and tell it to people who are willing to listen to my story. As for you, I have no desire to communicate at all." The exact same words were returned to him by Jack. If it was in the past, Luo Nan would have felt that Jack's words were sharp. But right now, he couldn't help but think. Was this Jack's free will, or was it the result of an artificial intelligence's calculations? This riddle would not be solved in a short amount of time. Luo Nan deeply felt Jack's murderous intent. He didn't hesitate any longer. He concentrated all of his energy and fled regardless of everything. This time, he learned from his previous lesson and directly fled to the bottom of the floor. Though the distance was even more pitiful than last time, less than 4 meters, The floor was constructed from a combination of concrete and high-strength light alloy. It was much tougher than the wall material that Jack had smashed apart. Jack's attack smashed down and the floor instantly caved in, but it didn't immediately collapse. Luonan took advantage of this opportunity to dive down another floor. The straight-line distance between him and Jack had already increased to over 30 meters. The binding power of the deep sea EM field suddenly weakened. Luonan's heart was filled with joy. He was about to forcefully leap through space once more. This time, his target was the night sky outside of the Deshang building. As long as he reached the void where there was nothing to rely on, Jack wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Then a muffled bang rang out and the bullet, which possessed powerful kinetic energy, instantly pierced through 2 floors of the floor. Even though the bullet deviated a bit in the process of piercing through, it still exploded near Luonan's soul body. The churning cloud of fire had the effect of a magnetic field, giving his soul body enormous interference. Luonan had seen similar special ammunition on the warship before, but the effect of this round was clearly stronger. And the ammunition wasn't just one round. It was a continuous barrage of bullets. All of them passed through the hole that had just been pierced through, exploding in succession. For a time, the cloud of fire pervaded the air, igniting a few flammable items on the floor. The 2 floors of the floor were forcibly smashed through in this one delay. Jack flew down just like that. The powerful deep sea EM field had already enveloped Luonan before he even arrived. It was as if Luonan's soul body had been thrown into the deep sea once more. It suddenly became sluggish and difficult to move. And this time, the temperature at the bottom of the sea rose crazily. It was like a volcano erupting in the sea, wanting to cook him thoroughly. Luonan suddenly felt a sense of weakness as he sank into it. It came from nothing, and it gradually became clear. It wasn't that Jack's format of fire or the deep sea EM field caused great harm to his soul body. Instead, the human-faced arachnid, who acted as an external fuel tank, had received heavy damage from the first wave of attack. It had yet to recover. Luonan hadn't truly reached the standard of an out-of-body state. He was able to roam freely in the form of a soul body. To a large extent, he had to rely on the energy provided by the human-faced arachnid. Jack's format of fire exploded, inadvertently striking Luonan's vital point. This wasn't good, and at this time, Jack's grand action of tearing down walls and setting them on fire finally triggered a response from the building's defense system. Right now, the floor the 2 were on was the office area of a certain large company. It was the weekend, so there wasn't a single person inside. The first to respond was the building's automatic mechanical security system. The door to the office area rumbled open following the simultaneous activation of the fire alarm and burglary alarm light. A civilian defense robot drove into the room. The barrel of its anti-riot gun was aimed at the only visible target, Jack. The problem was that the anti-riot gun hadn't even fired when the robot received a brand new command. It entered a docile standby state. Then the fire alarm and the burglary alarm all stopped. The building recovered its silence. Only the office items that had been set ablaze within the flames were left to burn. Jack didn't even turn his head during this entire process. He just stared dead at the location of Luonan's soul body. Chapter 116. Ronan had witnessed the entire process of Jack controlling the situation. It was as if Jack was holding a remote control for action and stop. With just a press, the security system of the entire floor, or even the entire building, froze. This scene absolutely wasn't the result of Jack's high level of authority in the Deshang building. This was because the robot didn't have any procedures to test his authority. It directly ceased all activities and didn't have any power to resist. This made Luonan think of Cragburst's pitiful jeep. Luonan finally broke his silence. He used psychic waves to transmit, "How did you do it?" "Oh, another exchange?" Jack sneered. "Why are you making a fuss? You can control. Oh, and Darksider life forms. I can control machinery. That's fair. Jack didn't refuse to communicate, but he didn't respond directly either. He didn't mind dealing with Luonan a bit more. After all, he couldn't find any traces of the Darksider life form from beginning to end. This caused him to brood over it. He needed time to adjust the relevant parameters of the database and unceasingly revise the range of his detection. Luonan could more or less guess what Jack was doing. After all, many of Jack's detection methods required the use of that electronic eye, so Jack was constantly turning his head. This was good news. It seemed that Jack was very afraid of the Darksider life form. Perhaps there was still a threat to the current him? Luonan secretly paid attention to this, but right now a large portion of his mind couldn't help drifting in the direction of controlling machinery. Jack and Yen Yongbua's previous actions reminded him of another similar example. Gear's underground laboratory. To put it more bluntly, the external neuron. Luonan could confirm that the thread in Jack's brain was indeed the external neuron. It was also the dynamo core that Luonan spoke of. It was this product that seemed to surpass the technology of Earth, that allowed it to bypass all authority and directly control all information devices, manipulating them at will. And now, new facts told him that other than the aforementioned functions, this thing was also the key to the burner and format of fire. Such a strange creation had actually accompanied him for 5 years, and it was mailed to him by that coward. What did that mean? What did that mean? It was hard for Luonan to divert his attention to ponder over this matter during the violent storm of pursuit and escape. Now that he had the slightest bit of time, the relevant thoughts were like heart-devouring bugs, gnawing and grinding in his heart. External neuron? Dynamo core? Burners? Gang leader? Yen Yongbua? Quantum Corporation, and that coward. Luonan's mind was practically tied into a dead knot by the sudden clues and bursts of information. If he didn't loosen up a bit, then his soul would suffocate. Luonan suddenly felt very regretful. Perhaps he really should have listened to Jack's 2 more stories. No matter what, he wanted to know what kind of connection there was between Jack, the mafia leader, and that coward. Right now, Luonan had to work hard for this goal. He did his best to maintain a clear line of thought. He used psychic waves to transmit information as slowly as possible to probe Jack's reaction. Controlling machines at will? You don't have that ability. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiding in the recycle stratum as a mafia boss. Instead, you'd be running out to do whatever you want. Jack laughed hoarsely. Are you trying to provoke me? Kid, you've already succeeded before, so you don't have to worry about how you die. I admit that you have the ability to kill me. After all, you are already a burner. What, did I say something wrong? Luonan saw Jack grin from the corner of his mouth. The sarcasm within was thick. Jack shrugged his shoulders. It's nothing. People always have the right to be ignorant. I don't have the obligation to correct them. Kid, there's no need to probe anymore. Call your pet. I'll give you a more satisfying death. Luonan would be stupid to listen to Jack's words. But Jack's sarcastic smile and tone were quite interesting. It was a kind of aloof superiority. The people he spoke of didn't seem to be specifically referring to Luonan. Instead, it was an unbridled map cannon. It was brimming with the flavor of, everyone in the world is drunk, but I am the only sober one. Luonan remembered that a considerable portion of Jack's high-level mental activity originated from the data template of the nucleus. In a certain sense, Jack was more real than any normal person. Then where did this sense of superiority come from? Luonan sized up Jack once more. The information he obtained from the mafia members showed that this savage and cruel fellow had become the mafia leader of this region in just a span of 2 to 3 years. He started off as a fighting instructor. He used the bloody 70% elimination rule to rapidly become an important figure in the fighting arena. Then he became a referee, a host, a partner, and finally became the chief spokesperson of the fighting arena's mafia power. His abilities overflowed as a mafia leader, but this didn't mean that he was the same in other areas. Then, it's the metal beetle, right? Luonan suddenly spoke up and went straight to the point. Jack was a bit startled, then he laughed. Are you still going to be angry, young man? Luonan ignored Jack's interference. His thoughts were so certain that everything that happened within Jack's body was exposed to the prying eyes of the human-faced arachnid. Yen Yongboi used it to control our jeep, and then you came over to deal with it. But you're clearly more interested in the metal beetle itself. Oh, the metal beetle is too unprofessional. You call it the Dynamo Core? The Deep Sea Type 4 Dynamo Core. It's a mystical device that allows ordinary altered humans to possess abilities similar to a burner. Jack was silent for a moment. The dark red electronic eyes that had been searching for the human-faced arachnid turned back to stare at the blurry figure of Luonan's soul body. You're trying to display your own intelligence? But we don't recruit new people here. The intensity of the deep sea EM field continued to increase as Jack spoke. Luonan's soul body felt even worse. From Luonan's perspective, the most important thing to do right now was to break free from Jack's control as quickly as possible and flee far away. However, the spiritual light gushing out from his mind interweaved into sections of thought. Under the pressure of the outside world, he pieced them together and advanced layer by layer. He was unwilling to interrupt this process. The Dynamo Core is very precious to you, so Yen Yongbo will use it to pay you. But looking at the model number, this should be a product that has already been put into production. At the very least, it's a trial production series of products. The only ones who possess this kind of manufacturing ability and are closely related to the burner are Quantum Corporation and their related powers. Luonan's brain power operated. It had certainly reached the pinnacle of his 15 years of life. He didn't directly converse with Jack. Instead, he endlessly tossed out a few bait in his words. At the same time, he earnestly observed all of Jack's reactions, using them to revise his own inferences. Of course, there's also you. You're an altered human, but you don't come from the military. You just happen to be so adaptable to the burner's abilities. The number of people in this world who can do this can be counted on one hand. So I believe that you also come from Quantum Corporation and that you've always worked for the apex technology company of this Earth. Luonan saw Jack's face reveal a mocking smile of superiority just as the psychic wave message was transmitted. Chapter 117. Seeing Jack's expression, Luonan seemed to be able to hear his main body's heart skip a beat. He had deliberately added the modifier phrase, Earth's top technology company, in order to probe into Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. He had thought of many reactions beforehand, but he never imagined that Jack would bring this smile over. Even the curve of Jack's mouth was exactly the same. Luonan admitted that he had to reconsider Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. But before that, there was one thing he needed to make clear. Why? Why would a gang leader holed up in the recycling stratum use this sort of attitude to point at a power that was ranked in the top 3 in terms of market value in the world? Using the simplest of straight-line logic to consider things, wouldn't that mean that behind Jack's back, at least in his consciousness, there was a colossus that could look down upon Quantum Corporation, the Earth's apex tech company, with eyes of contempt? Luonan once again thought of the hooks buried within Jack's words. Soul configurations, deep blue world. These were terms he had never heard of before. Now that he thought about it, it was extremely likely that they hid a world-shocking secret. Is that coward related to these things? How deep was the connection? Thoughts spun in his mind, but time didn't allow Luonan to think too much. He could only continue his previous train of thought and make some slight adjustments to probe Jack's background. You're both employees of Quantum Corporation, but Yen Yongbwa can control the Rainbow Fund. You can only hang around in a gang. He can casually toss out a dynamo core and you'll fight to the death for it. From what I know, Yen Yongbwa hasn't been a part of Quantum Corporation for long. Is it because of his strength that he was able to quickly climb to a high position? Or is it because of his father? Or perhaps as an altered human who needs the help of a dynamo core to possess the abilities of a burner is destined to be a defective product from the production line. You're too damn smart. Another humming sound rang out from within the low and hoarse roar. The pressure and heat of the deep CEM field rapidly rose. Under the sudden increase in pressure, Luo Nan's soul body was forcibly compressed. Clearly, Luo Nan's words had stabbed Jack's sore spot. The smile on Jack's face completely disappeared. He reached out with his hand and pressed it against his forehead. It was as if he was concealing his momentary loss of self-control. But the electronic eye that was already on the verge of burning exposed his current mood. Fury template, highest level. Right now, Luo Nan was already straining to even transmit psychic wave. However, he was even more clear that if he were to really give up like this, Jack would very likely immediately make a move to finish him off. He needed a little more time. Did I misspeak? I'm really sorry. I'm just saying my guesses. Some of them might sound stupid, but I think our current situation is even more stupid. That's right. The speaker is stupid, and the listener isn't smart either. Jack panted heavily. The last time he reacted like this was when the power went out. But this was really effective. His emotions began to recover, and he was even mocking himself. This level of control seemed to be something only a modified person who could switch their template at any time could achieve. Ronan noticed Jack's restraint. It was reasonable to say that this callous altered human had many opportunities. He could erupt with a powerful format of fire and turn Luo Nan's soul body into ashes. But he never truly made a move other than that first strike. Compared to the ruthlessness and decisiveness he displayed before, the current Jack was a little too hesitant. This had nothing to do with intelligence or stupidity. It could only be considered from a more realistic level. Was it fear of the Darksider lifeforms? Or was it because of a more direct, more fatal reason? Jack clearly wouldn't reveal the answer, and he also made substantial movements. He began to walk forward, closing the distance between him and Luo Nan's soul body. As the distance shrunk, the pressure of the magnetic field increased exponentially. Luo Nan tried to retreat, but the results were minimal. Jack revealed a smile once more. I've heard back in the deep blue world that it's possible to use the powerful magnetic field of the dynamo core to confine and capture souls, and even Darksider lifeforms. Right now I can give it a try. The deep blue world? Luo Nan's first thought was actually the information that came from far beyond the heavens. He only truly reacted in the next moment. Jack actually wanted to capture him alive? Yes, looking at the increasing pressure of the magnetic field, Jack really did have this kind of plan. Compared to the beginning, Luo Nan's soul body had already shrunk by more than 2 times. If this continued, he would probably become the legendary 1-inch mage, someone who could be needed by anyone. Luo Nan was already unable to think of anything else. He concentrated all of his energy, wanting to make his soul body move once more. But at this time, the only thing that could move his entire body was the heavily chained crow, which had been circulating without end from beginning to end. Chains? Luo Nan's thoughts were still unclear when the vibrating amplitude of the heavily chained crow suddenly increased. But this wasn't an internal force, it was an external impact. A sharp hissing sound rang out. A phantom pounced out from the floor below, forcibly colliding into the deep CEM field. The impact force on the mental plane actually caused the magnetic field's operation to suddenly stagnate. Luo Nan's soul body was struck by this phantom in the next moment. The phantom tightened and then loosened. Then Luo Nan flew backwards like he was riding on a cloud, escaping from the range of the deep CEM field's control. The human-faced arachnid. This malevolent monster had killed its way out when it was needed the most. Its body still carried the vapors of turbid currents of emotions. The heavy injuries from the format of fire could no longer be seen, at least on the surface. Success. Luo Nan's mind relaxed. He flipped over and stood on the back of the human-faced arachnid. He urged this monster, which had just drunk a blood potion, to fly towards the nearest outer wall of the building without turning his head. Jack's heavy and swift footsteps rang out behind him. He was still in pursuit, his speed rapidly increasing, and the large cubicle layout of this floor's office gave him ample space to accelerate. The deep CEM field followed Jack's pursuit, moving like a shadow behind Luonan and the human-faced arachnid. It was like a silent evil beast, staring fixedly at its prey, wanting to devour it as soon as possible. But in the end it was useless. A distance of several dozen meters was far too short for a soul body. Luonan and the human-faced arachnid directly smashed through the outer wall of the building in the time of a single breath. They flashed again in the interweaving neon lights of the night sky, flying 1,000 meters into the air. Jack charged to the end of the building. His momentum hadn't dissipated yet, so he heavily smashed into the French window. The tempered glass, which was of considerable strength and toughness, exploded with spiderweb cracks in an instant. Unexpectedly, it didn't shatter. But the lightweight alloy that held the four sides in place was unable to withstand the impact. The entire French window was peeled off from the wall by Jack, falling rapidly to the ground. Jack used the momentum to dissipate his momentum. He stood at the edge of the empty building and pulled out a thick-barreled handgun. It should be the one that had shot out the military's special ammunition. The muzzle of the gun was aimed at the night sky. But in the end, Jack didn't fire in vain. He just stared coldly at the empty shadow in the night sky. Only after a long while did he turn around and leave. Chapter 118. Leave? Aren't you taking things too easy? Luonan stood in the night sky. He watched Jack hatefully leave through the crisscrossing light rail outside of the Deshang building. He let out a long sigh in his heart and laughed in spite of himself. There was a very interesting relationship between Luonan and Jack right now. Jack's deep CEM field possessed the ability to instantly heavily injure or even kill Luonan, but its effective range was limited. Luonan himself didn't have any methods to threaten Jack, but he had an extremely long range of perception with a radius of 500 meters. This meant that when Luonan pulled apart the distance between him and Jack, it would be nearly impossible for Jack to escape Luonan's tracking and locking onto him. Luonan cut a sorry figure within the deep CEM field. Now Jack's movements would be just as distressed. Each and every one of Jack's movements would be exposed to Luonan's clairvoyance. Luonan patted the human-faced arachnid lightly, indicating for it to follow. The human-faced arachnid suddenly flew into the air. It swiftly plunged down from the night sky and crashed into the Deshang building once more. It passed through the wall as if it was nothing. The turbid smoke curled around its body, making it look demonic and bizarre. Luonan's mental senses locked onto Jack, who was over 20 floors away. A distance of 100 meters, centimeter precision, and several dozen floors. It was safe and meticulous at the same time, and Luonan could react in time. Jack was certainly able to sense Luonan's monitoring and locking onto him. He turned his head repeatedly along the way, accurately locking onto the direction of Luonan's soul body every time. But so what? He still couldn't do anything to Luonan. Luonan was much more relaxed this time. He stared at Jack's whereabouts as he sorted out the situation with the human-faced arachnid. Right now Luonan's soul body was standing on the back of the human-faced arachnid. The sensation on the mental plane was very strange. Even though his nervous system was able to restore the sensation to the greatest degree, there were still some things that were impossible to translate. He could only understand them. Luonan came into contact with the human-faced arachnid. It was like he was standing on top of a cloud covered in burrs. There was nothing below him, but there was the scorching internal pressure and external tension acting at the same time, propping up the sensation on the mental plane. The so-called internal pressure and tension was just a rough feeling. The human-faced arachnid's foundation structure was actually hidden within. The current precision of Luo Nan's senses wasn't enough to pry into the mysteries within, but he could roughly sense that the foundation structure of the human-faced arachnid was actually a bit loose. The human-faced arachnid had collided head-on with Jack's format of fire when the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries. Most of its devil body had been melted away by the format of fire. Less than half of its body remained. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, this sort of injury was serious but not fatal. It could consume a spiritual seed, or its own kind, to achieve rapid recovery and even increase in power. But Luo Nan instinctively rejected the first evil method. As for the second method, where would he find other human-faced arachnid clones in such a short time? Even if they found it, it was hard to say who would swallow who. Therefore, Luo Nan could only choose the stupidest path for him. Go drink water from the turbid flow of emotions. Drink until you're full. It didn't matter if the human-faced arachnid was happy or not. This was the only way for the human-faced arachnid to recover as soon as possible. Fortunately, the underground fighting arena at the bottom of the Deshang building was a dirty reservoir of negative emotions. Luo Nan gave the human-faced arachnid a death order. He would eat wherever he went, but he had to avoid Rue 1 and Crag Burst. In a certain sense, his conversation with Jack was tantamount to buying time for the human-faced arachnid. Right now, Luo Nan's plan could be considered a success. The human-faced arachnid had recovered a bit of its vitality, saving Luo Nan from the most fatal danger. But from another perspective, the consequences of forcing the human-faced arachnid to drink dirty water were extremely serious. Even though the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries from the format of fire, its foundation was still quite solid. It was just weak due to excessive consumption. Now this fellow appeared to have an imposing aura, but its foundation was quite unstable. It had dropped by more than one level from its peak, and it wasn't easy to make up for it. Luo Nan knew from this that the grade of food was extremely important to the human-faced arachnid. It absolutely could not touch the return grass, unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, were the people in the fighting arena still alive? Crag Burst's voice came over just as this thought flashed through his mind. Hello, hello. Hello, hello? Scout, did you get disconnected? Nope. From beginning to end, Luo Nan hadn't informed Crag Burst that he had come alone to find Jack. On one hand, he didn't want to expose the existence of his soul body. On the other hand, he felt that Rue 1, who was in the fighting arena, needed Crag Burst's attention. He had considered everything thoroughly, but he never thought that he would be faced with such a dangerous situation. It was reasonable to say that with the existence of the Hexaear, the communication between the two should have been unobstructed. The two had even spoken to each other before facing off against Jack head-on. But Crag Burst didn't make a sound for a period of time. Now that Luo Nan thought about it, he found it very strange. Luo Nan thought about that dangerous situation. Perhaps Jack's deep CEM field had an interference effect. I saw that your crow was smacking its lips. I thought that your spirit attachment time was up. Nope. Wait a moment. Luo Nan controlled the human-faced arachnid to switch to a large angle. He arrived at the middle floor of the Deshang building. He could completely display the advantage of his sensing range here, encompassing the entire Deshang building. The situation of the underground fighting arena entered into Luo Nan's control in an instant. However, paying attention to both sides at the same time was quite a challenge to his energy and observation precision. The situation of the underground fighting arena was somewhat outside of Luo Nan's expectations. Mr. Ma's little darling hadn't been transported over yet. There was only Rue 1 by herself on the fighting arena. But the faces of the several hundred tycoons in the spectator stands were all glowing with health. They were full of energy and they were even more excited. They chatted loudly with their gambling opponents, provoked them, and endlessly increased the stake. or they teased the accompanying beauties, handsome men, and even the sexual services provided by the fighting arena. Some simply acted on the spot and did preposterous things under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Of course, this could also become a part of the gambling game. Had they really just been swept clean by the human-faced arachnid? They're all crazy. As an ability user, Cragburst had seen many preposterous and depraved scenes in his many years of adventuring. But the current situation could be counted on one hand. This is simply some secret order's carnival ceremony. They use all methods to please the demon god. Hey, do you think that there's really an order behind them? I don't know. Though Luonan said this with his mouth, he was reminded by Cragburst to pour a bit more energy into the ugly tycoons over there. Oh, this kind of emotion. What a big, empty fire. Chapter 119. The human-faced arachnid was a first-rate looter and arsonist. Luonan was certain that the human-faced arachnid had just swept through this place wantonly. It was not an exaggeration to say that it had sucked the marrow from the bones. But during this process, the human-faced arachnid displayed its outstanding looting technique. It swallowed the negative emotions and the corresponding energy and vitality. It hollowed out the foundations of the vast majority of people here, leaving behind some floating soil and leaf. Then it lit a fire to its heart's content. The negative emotions that went out of control were the spark. The floating energy and vitality were the fuel to ignite the fire. There were many examples like this in reality. The weaker the body, the more uncontrollable the desire. The moment one lost control, the last bit of vitality within one's body would be completely squeezed out and burned away. Right now, the rich people in the stands, including their attendants and secretaries, and the large amount of related staff members of the fighting arena, had sunk into this situation. They were completely unaware of it. When Luonan saw through the crux of this, the situation of the fighting arena became completely different in his eyes. This wasn't a fighting arena at all. It was clearly a brazier that was about to burn dry. Or perhaps it was a deep mine that was filled with gas. It was the kind that had already been ignited. The enormous amount of negative emotions and the floating energy and vitality formed a cloud of fire that was hard to see with the naked eye. It diffused out on the mental plane. If these people could sense their own souls, they would discover that the most terrifying feeling of suffocation had already descended upon their heads. Only an awakened like Cragburst could feel the intense feeling of disharmony within. He felt an enormous rejection towards this environment. Why did it create this environment? Luonan was disinclined to think too much about the final fate of the rich people in the stands. Instead, he was quite curious about the human-faced arachnid's way of doing things. In any case, Jack wasn't doing anything special right now. Luonan patted the human-faced arachnid beneath him, indicating for it to give him a demonstration. Of course the human-faced arachnid wouldn't refuse. It immediately flashed a few times and charged back into the fighting arena. Then it hid its demonic body deep within the cloud of fire. Its 6 heterochromatic demon eyes were half squinted and half opened. Its malevolent mouth opened wide and sucked in the cloud of fire. It then spat out the unstable muddy flow of emotions from within its body, forming a stable exchange. Luonan completely understood. The human-faced arachnid couldn't disobey Luonan's orders, so it created an environment to kill poison for itself. It did its utmost to remove the components within the turbid flow of emotions that it was unwilling to absorb. Even though he didn't know how much the human-faced arachnid would improve after this, it was fine as long as the human-faced arachnid was happy. In essence, the fighting arena was no longer a place where the rich and powerful could seek excitement and wantonly seek pleasure. Instead, it was an enormous altar. All the rulers, who believed themselves to be infallible, had become livestock placed on the altar. They were slaughtered as the human-faced arachnid desired. Though this didn't really conform to Luonan's aesthetics, he didn't feel the need to fix it. Glancing at Jack again, He saw that the fellow had slowed down and seemed to be thinking about something. Luo Nan didn't need the human-faced arachnid by his side at all times to track him, and the previous combat proved that it would be easier for Luo Nan to adapt if he and the human-faced arachnid were separated. Luo Nan let the human-faced arachnid stay in the fighting arena for the time being. It would be good to stabilize its unstable foundation a bit. However, less than 10 seconds after he made this decision, an unforeseen event occurred. Rui-1, who had been standing on the stage with her hands by her side, suddenly raised her head, her gaze pointing towards the void above her head. That place was originally the position of the broadcast screen. Her image was displayed on the screen. Many people noticed this change, and soon they gave a reasonable explanation. Oh, the flat-chested witch is starting to get sentimental. Is she going to see her final, whole image? Look, there won't be another chance in the future. A commotion that wasn't too big nor too small set off in the fighting arena. The exceptionally excited spectators cast their filthy and mocking words together with their irrepressible emotions towards the fighting stage. Rui-1 didn't react to these stimulations at all. She just looked up in a daze. Was she looking at her own image? It wasn't like this. Luo Nan was certain that Rui-1's gaze seemed to be directed towards the broadcast screen, but in reality, the focus wasn't there at all. Instead, it was directed towards the human-faced arachnid. This was because the human-faced arachnid's 6 heterochromatic demon eyes suddenly opened in that instant and they pointed towards Rui-1's position. The demonic body that had been idle within the flaming cloud suddenly tightened. Burning negative emotions and vital energy curled around its body, forming faintly discernible rings of fire. Luo Nan's command came in at this time. He was worried that the human-faced arachnid would actually take a bite out of Rui-1, the spiritual seed that it had coveted for a long time. He wanted the human-faced arachnid to retract its position. The human-faced arachnid did as it was told, but Rui-1's line of sight unexpectedly followed and moved without the slightest deviation. At this time, Kragburst felt that something was wrong. Hey, what is she looking at? I don't know. Luo Nan's scalp went numb when he said this. If this scene was not an illusion, then Rui-1 seemed to be able to see the human-faced arachnid. Could she see the dark side of life form? Rui-1 was an ability user? But why was there no sign before? Or had his ability just awakened? Was it the stimulation from the human-faced arachnid? A few questions popped up in his mind, but none of them could be answered. The human-faced arachnid growled in a low voice. This was the response to Luo Nan's command. Originally, only Luo Nan could hear it, but now Rui-1, the cold and silent young girl on the fighting stage, raised her head once more. Her gaze pointed to the sky above the fighting arena. Luo Nan would be at the end of the line of sight if it extended its line of sight to approximately 300 meters. Goodness gracious! Luo Nan clearly knew that Rui-1 could not see him, but he was still shocked fiercely. He could not help but shift. Right when he was thinking about pondering over the girl's situation, he never expected that things would come and he would be overwhelmed. Jack ended his contemplation at this time and his speed suddenly increased. This fellow returned to his training room in a short half a minute. He picked up the wristband he had discarded earlier and seemed to be communicating with the outside world. Luo Nan's energy needed to be completely focused over there. Before this, he gave the human-faced arachnid another command. He told it to stay far away from Rui-1, to stop distracting the girl's attention. After arranging everything, Luo Nan began to close the distance between him and Jack in order to increase the precision of his senses. But in the end, this was different from when he was facing his contact person. Unless Luo Nan didn't want his life anymore, it would be impossible for him to get close to Jack's side. And in this case, it was impossible to guarantee the precision of his senses. In the end, Luo Nan took the risk to advance to a distance of approximately 50 meters from Jack. He was able to feel the electrical waves radiating from the wristband, but he was only able to track it for a short distance before he had to give up. Jack's communication time was extremely short, and the direction of the transmission was clearly pointing outside of the Deshang building. The distance was so far that it far exceeded the limits of his senses. Maybe he was contacting Yan Yongbua? Luonan could only make blind guesses. And then, Jack entered the training room's changing room and changed his clothes. A white shirt, a black bow tie, and black trousers. These were the standard fighting referee attire. Then he shot a cold glance at Luonan's position, went straight out the door, and entered the high-speed elevator. He wanted to go to the fighting arena? That gaze was clearly a provocation. It was very clear that some matters in the fighting arena had been exposed. The possibility of it being the human-faced arachnid was very small. Then, Crag burst. Jack's here. Which one? Where? Crag burst was stunned for a moment, but he quickly came back to his senses. He immediately looked for Luonan to confirm.